Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us a few minutes early. We'll start in about 2 minutes. If you would like some information to run through, we have some resources up in the nest, recent podcasts, and some interesting recent examples of OSINT work. So work through those for a moment, and we'll begin shortly.
Just a reminder to everybody, if you are interested in this space and you think others might be too, you can go down to the bottom right-hand corner of the space and hit the little chat icon and retweet the space and invite others to come and listen as well.
To news from Ukraine and around the world that's developed through the use of open source intelligence techniques, but also to kind of to build a community and to try to get a regular place where people who are doing this work can come to present their latest projects and really get a community of practitioners together, so that it's almost, I'm hoping to make it a little bit like a water cooler chat. So to that end, we have two great guests joining us tonight. Initially, we'll be speaking with Nalcio, who has been doing great work in tracking equipment losses in connection with the war in Ukraine. And then later on, we'll be chatting with David Rosnow, who is a software developer who has been active in Twitter Spaces and who has made one of his software products available to some in the OSINT community, particularly those who are tracking events in Iran, in order to map them out. And so I thought it would be great, not just to speak to people who are mappers. In the past, we've spoken with Andrew Perpetua, for example, but also to speak to developers. And hopefully he'll be the first in a series of those who are engaged in both the software development and particularly sort of in the geographical information system side of things. Just to explain, because we have two guests tonight, we'll move over to our conversation with Nalcio in about 2 or 3 minutes. Often when I start out, I'd like to just identify some of the most recent developments in sort of tools and events. And so if you look in the nest, in this space, we try to rely heavily on the nest because we like to share sources. And the first tweet at the moment on the left, or it's actually the second at the moment, is my main agenda for the evening. So if you go up there, you'll see that following our speakers, we also have some topics for conversation. There are links there to background materials that hopefully will inspire questions or comments from you. And at that point later in the evening, we will go to a roundtable discussion format. So if you look at those items and anything inspires you, please feel free to request the mic as we go along. The one thing I'll point out up front, some of those resources are in the nest for you right now, so you can have a look while you're listening. That includes a community calendar that we've developed because the Spaces calendar on Twitter is not very good at all. This includes both spaces of people who are sort of friends of ours in the Ukraine OSINT adjacent spaces, but also events from large foundations that you might not otherwise be able to keep track of in one spot. So have a look at that calendar, and you can sign up there. If the event's already passed, often there is a link that will allow you to find a recording. There are a few of the most recent podcasts that have come up, including some of the better known ones, such as War on the Rocks, and a conversation that Michael Kaufman also had with the Carnegie Center. I have included a little section I call Ukraine Overview, which is taking some of the work of the Better Mappers, including the Institute for the Study of War, Andrew Perpetua and Defmon. And so they are up in the nest in case you'd like to compare the status of the various maps at this point, because it often gives you a great context for understanding the other details that we're discussing. And finally, there are a handful of what I think are good examples from the last 3 or 4 days since our last space of OSINT-based threads. So I'd invite you to have a look at those. I will speak to those once we've gone through our interviews with our guests tonight. So at this point, I would like to jump into our conversation with Nalcio. So I'm going to make sure I see he's here with us tonight. I'm going to make sure that he has his invitation to speak, and we'll get him up in just a moment. And so, Nalcio, if you can hear me, if you'd like to request the mic at any point, we'll bring you up to begin. While we're waiting for Nalcio to join us, I will just point out 1 or 2 of these interesting examples of OSINT threads from the last couple of days. So I have put 2 of them sort of featured up in the nest. Just to speak to for a moment. So the first is an investigation that was carried out, I believe it was by The Guardian, in order to identify the Russian chain of command. And of course, this is important work, not only to understand the mentality of the Russian command and to try to get insight into their point of view in planning their potential offenses, defenses, and where they might move along the line, but also for purposes of potentially identifying culpability in war crimes down the line. And I thought that it was a good example of just good old-fashioned, investigative work. The other that should be in the nest, I will make sure it is in a moment, is a tool that's particularly helpful in the last day or so, because I understand that there was an additional launch by North Korea of a missile today, and it is a tool that has been developed along with the arms control wonk and a number of people who work with him. And what it does is it measures disturbances in the ionosphere that are associated with missile launch. And I highlighted it in one earlier space, but it continues to do good work, and it's likely something that we will see in the news. Likely something that we will see in the news in the next couple of days. As the United States and North Korea, the United States and South Korea engage in joint drills, and North Korea responds with provocations. So we are working to get our guest up to join us. I'm not sure if it's a technical issue that's slowing things down, but if that's the case, I will go into one or two more of these interesting examples of OSINT, and hopefully we'll get into our conversation shortly. Oh, it looks like we've managed to figure it all out. It often takes a moment for a new speaker to catch up to the audio. While we're working on that in the background, I will go into one or two more of these interesting good examples. And just before I go into one more of those, I'll note that Friends of the Space are live streaming the audio from this space to YouTube, and there is a link up in the nest in case you'd like to check it out there. As we're building this space out, we are hoping to, while we will be centered on Twitter in order to engage the audience, because it allows sort of dynamic discussion here on Twitter. We are looking to expand our distribution of content a little bit more, so you can check us out on YouTube, where those live streams will live, and you can catch them after the fact. So putting up a few more of the interesting examples from the last week. There is a tweet that should appear in the nest in just a moment by Mark Krutov, who works with, I believe it's Radio Free Europe, where he was looking at a shipment that allegedly carried arms from Iran to Russia, and it was said that it carried a significant amount of both regular ammunition and also artillery shells. And this is a rare case where instead of confirming a hidden transfer, it appears to be evidencing the fact that the suspected transfer may not have happened. And so when you go through the thread, you'll see that they actually managed to identify a sailor who was on the ship, who took pictures through the course of the journey, and based on the amount of evidence that they were able to find on social media from this sailor's profile, they got the impression that the ship did not obviously appear to be loaded with large amounts of ammo, as had been rumored. So I thought it was an interesting example of sort of, a disproof of a suspected shipment, and interesting for that reason. And just to update the audience, I'm hearing from my co-hosts that they are working with our speaker to try to get him up. There may be a technical issue, but we'll hopefully have that resolved in the next few minutes. Several of my examples of good OSINT research this week focused on just long-term dedication to research. And that Guardian article that I highlighted a moment or two ago about identifying the Russian command, I think is one example of that. Another example along those same lines in terms of dedication is this tweet that's currently in the nest by Michelle Brockman. And so she has been following the shadow fleet of oil tankers for quite some time, and developing a list tracking tankers that have been sold off, and then it's not clear where they have shifted to in terms of registration. And she tracks that, both on sales reports, flag registrations, apparently insurance registries as well. Solely focused on Ukraine here. And so I came across some work being done by Aaron Zelen, who is working on a tool that he calls the Islamic State Mapping Project. And Aaron is a senior fellow at the Washington Institute. And he's put together a pretty slick video presentation of events around the world that seem to demonstrate the influence of the Islamic State. I think that's the exact sort of compilation tool that can be so helpful when you're doing background research with breaking news. So I'm certainly going to keep it sort of in my bookmarks, and you may want to as well. One more. This one is not so much a good example. I'm not sure honestly how good an example it is, but occasionally I like to take a claimed item that I just haven't had the time to confirm myself. So previously we've talked about transfers of munitions from Serbia, like grad munitions that were claimed to have come from Serbia, but the Serbians denied it, and the Russians claimed the evidence sale documents were faked. To try to solve that mystery, which in our last session, the Serbian President Vučić came out and said, well,
we decided
even if we did sell weapons, or even if munitions were sold by Serbian companies to Ukraine, they're private companies and they need to make money too, which I take as good as an admission that they did in fact provide some, Serbian company did provide some munitions to Ukraine. So I consider that one a bit of a mystery solved.
Statements, videos, as well as magazines.
But my mystery for this week,
there's a bunch of legal documents,
and there has already been debate in the comments about it. It's the first item up in the nest on the left.
As well, and it combines the primary
was claimed to be potentially the first photos of
to create a map
Phoenix
about a
ghost.
year and a half ago, and it's called the Islamic State.
However, people were immediately comparing its dimensions and layout to
a number of different types of
Switchblade 300, the Switchblade 600. Not that they are the same, but comparing them.
The Islamic State.
And others noted that on the wings of this craft were the markings ZOV, which some were saying are in fact Russian markings as a reference to the special operation.
Well. So you have both sides
so
of the coin.
It may be that this is just a lesser known Russian
primary sources from both ends.
Drone as opposed to a Phoenix Ghost. But I present it just in case anybody wants to dig into it a little bit further.
The Islamic State Select Worldwide Activity Interactive Map. And it's trying to show a number of different types of activities related to the Islamic State.
We are still working away
actions
at trying
against
to our guest up.
To make it easier
I will take a moment
certain information related to the Islamic State, since it's more
dive
visual, and it
into
includes statements, videos,
something that's a little bit more philosophical on the front of OSINT.
So you have both sides of the coin, from one side of the government, the other side from the group as well, and it combines the primary sources from both ends.
There were a few developments this week. The first of which was a tweet that was put up by Tataragami. And if you're not familiar with that account, Tataragami is an officer in the Ukrainian military who's been presenting some interesting analysis of Russian strategy, particularly the development of these
certain information related to the Islamic State, since it's more visual, and it includes statements, videos,
a deviation from
as well as magazines
Russian
from the group.
Doctrine in this
There's a bunch of legal documents in it as well.
Has
so
also had some very insightful
one side of the government, the other side from the group as well,
about developments around Vuhledar.
Primary sources from both ends.
And this week, Tataragami came out to put up a couple of posts in the thread about his hope to express sincere gratitude to the global OSINT community for
different types of activities related
invaluable
to
assistance,
the Islamic State, as well as actions
going on to say that while some may view those engaging in it as keyboard warriors,
certain information related to the Islamic State,
really
more visual, and it includes statements, videos.
I think he said something like it could even be teenagers who are passing data onto the front that is actually making a difference on the battlefield. So I thought that was interesting confirmation from somebody who can sort of see the end of the chain.
A year and a half ago, and it's called the Islamic State.
Who can see the end of the chain where the OSINT information sort of meets the sharp end of the spear. And so I take his word for it that it has been helpful to the Ukrainians directly.
We wanted to make it easier to digest certain
related
success of
OSINT
news, more visual, and it includes statements, videos.
The last item I've just added to
magazines from the group. There's a bunch of legal documents in it
an
as
excerpt
well. So you have
put up by Shashank Joshi, who is the defense editor at The Economist
as well, and it combines the primary sources from both ends.
And this was in the most recent
We decided to create a map
refresh of the UK-based integrated review. So it's sort of their threat
and it's trying to show
posture.
a number of different types of activities
within that,
related to the Islamic State.
They note that they will be establishing a new open source intelligence hub
easier to digest
in order to better integrate the government's capabilities to collect and analyze publicly available information.
Statements, videos,
so I consider that a notable
magazines from the
win.
group. There's a bunch of legal
OSINT as well.
documents in it as well. So you have both sides of the coin from one side of the government, the other side from the group as well, and it combines the primary sources from both ends.
Two other posts I thought were interesting this week connected with OSINT, and I've labeled them in the thread down below.
It's called the Islamic State Select Worldwide
as
Activity
being related to the philosophy of OSINT.
And it's trying to show a number of different types
and
of
they
activities
are
related to the
actually
Islamic State,
posts
as well as
that are up
actions
in the original
against the
Polish,
Islamic
so
State.
you have to be a little bit dedicated in order to work your way through
certain
them.
information related to the Islamic State.
But they were inspired by debates
videos,
around what is good open source intelligence and who is doing good work,
well. So you have both
primarily
sides of the
on
coin
Twitter.
from one side of the government, the other side from the group as well, and it combines the primary sources
among
from both ends.
Those in sort of the Polish, Eastern European OSINT community,
year and a half ago,
and I thought they were quite thoughtful, explaining that not all OSINT work needs to result in
activities related to the Islamic State,
sort of actionable analysis, but that really a lot of what's done here is work in progress.
Easier to digest,
particularly on Twitter, where a contribution might just be an observation or a data point or a confirmation,
documents in it
and that
well.
often that can be just as valuable as
one side of the government, the other side from the group as well.
A fully formed report that includes an analysis and a prediction. Particularly predictions that are long-term or sweeping in scope. While those are helpful,
trying to show a number of
that's not
different
always the
types
goal.
of activities
And so I think that
related to
was
the Islamic State, as well as actions against the Islamic
note
State.
to sort of set expectations,
to digest
and that
information
to the extent that some may feel that
statements, videos,
OSINT analysis is a bit of a competition,
magazines from the group,
really I think it's a collaboration, and it was that
so you have both sides of the coin,
philosophical point
one side of the government, the other side from the group as well.
I think matches well with my hope to build a bit of a community who can share their ideas in a forum like this, and ultimately may even meet some people that they can
worldwide activity interactive map,
collaborate with.
And it's trying to show a number of different types of activities related to the Islamic State, as well as actions against the Islamic State.
So I know we're still at work in getting our speaker to come up. I appreciate your patience in sticking with us.
Visual, and it includes statements, videos, as well as magazines from the group. There's a bunch of legal documents
hope to have it figured out in the next
so you have both sides of the coin
few minutes.
One side of the
in the
government,
event
the other side from the group as well,
that we have to reschedule, we'll make that known to everybody. I know that I have been and remain very excited to catch up with Nalcio.
It's called the Islamic State Select
and I know that
Interactive Map.
his
and it's trying to
willingness
show
to speak
a
with
number
me
of
here
different types
had
of
caught lots of
activities
attention and drawn
related to
some
the Islamic
interesting
State,
names
as
to the
well as
space.
actions against
So
the
if we do
Islamic
have to
State,
reschedule, we'll make it widely known, and we'll test everything in advance to make sure that everybody can connect
more visual, and it includes
in the way that we hope.
statements, videos, as well as magazines from the group. There's a bunch of legal documents.
I can launch into some updates on topics that we've previously discussed here in the space, just to go through some of that material while we spend a few more minutes trying to work it out.
We decided to create a map about a year and a half ago.
And before doing that, just for those listening, I will highlight the good work that Nalcio has done. For those who may have come hoping to learn a little bit more about him, he has been involved in tracking vehicle losses with a really high degree of detail. And in particular, he's been contributing to,
as well as magazines from the group.
He has been contributing to
legal documents in it as well.
The
both sides of the coin from
losses tracking project,
the other side from the group as well.
That's run by Orks Biankov, who I'm sure is familiar to just about everybody here.
We decided to create a map
better known as just Orks.
A year and a half ago, and it's called the Islamic State Select Worldwide Activity Interactive Map.
In contributing to that project,
a number of different types of
been especially notable as somebody who is catching
against the Islamic State. We wanted to,
looking at things with extreme detail and catching misidentified entries, whether they're duplicates or they've been assigned to the wrong country or identified as the wrong type.
as well as magazines from the group.
When we do finally get to speak with him, whether tonight or at a rescheduled time, there is a lot of technique that I'm sure goes into that, that I'm keen to find out a little bit more about. Jacoby, did you want to come in with an update?
Sure. Nalcio sent you a request, and Zodiac is downloading and rejiggering his device, so he should be up in a minute. So you should see Nalcio requesting, I think.
Yes, so I did not see a request. I had an invite out to him, and I've just reissued an invite. So it may just be that it's not coming back and forth for some reason, potentially connected with that Android glitch. So we'll see whether the invite works. I know Exit, if you happen to see a request, I have seen requests come in a few times and approve them, but it seems like every time we try to bring one or two folks up to the stage that they immediately drop, which seems typical of the way I've seen that Android problem described. But so if we need to, in the before any next space, if the glitch persists, we'd be happy to work with people to explain how to roll back to a prior version of Twitter. The way that I did it was to download, I think it was version 9.78 from, I think the site was something like APK Works. I found a description of the way to solve the issue put up by the account. It was actually the account OSINT-TV, who frequents some of these spaces. And as funny as his username is, his solution worked. So if you are listening and affected by that Android glitch and would like to try to fix it for the next couple of days, go look up OSINT-TV and OSINT-TV, and hopefully that will get everything solved for you.
For a second there, I thought we had it. We'll try one more thing here.
Sure. Okay. While that's going on in the background, I will just get into some of the updates from a past space, and we'll go from there. Well, actually, maybe what I'll do first is I'll just highlight a couple. Oh, terrific! I can. Thank you very much for joining us. All right, guys. Looks like we have our problem solved. Did you change anything in your settings, or have the stars just aligned?
I had to install an old version of Twitter.
Yeah, I had to do the same this afternoon. That's a huge pain. But thank you for doing that to join us.
Yeah, so sorry for the technical difficulties.
No problem. It's honestly Twitter. It's not either of our ends. So we'll jump into our conversation with Nalcio. Just to repeat some of the introduction that I launched into a moment ago, Nalcio has been tracking vehicle losses with a really high degree of detail, and he's been contributing to the database that's maintained by Oryx Spionkop, who is better known to all of us just as Oryx. And mainly his contribution has been by catching misidentified entries, whether they're duplicates, as in the same vehicle photographed in multiple, states or at multiple times, whether they've been assigned to the wrong country or they may have been identified as the wrong type of vehicle. Just the other day, and you can see it in my thread that was an invite for this space, just the other day, Oryx tweeted out with an image of Nalcio correcting somebody, saying that Nalcio sees all and Nalcio knows all. And so with that introduction, Nalcio, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So I thought I might start just by asking, can you confirm or deny, do you in fact see all and know all?
No, I'm not omniscient and I do make mistakes.
Okay. Well, that's reassuring. I had been worried you might be the first. So I first came across your work when it was starting to be highlighted by Oryx and his team in the late summer of last year, 2022, and then into the early fall. And I would see them come out. For several months, they were sort of building up their database. And then they started to come out and say, oh, we've removed one or two duplicates, or we've had a correction. And then I started to see them say, we have a significant update and we'll be changing 15 or 20 entries at once. And they'll say, and thanks for compiling all of this to Nalcio. And that's, the first time that I saw your name. And so, apologies if you've been doing this for, before that time, before you came to my attention. Have you been doing this work publicly before that, or did you only start in the summer of last year?
I started helping the Oryx team by first sending documents compiling mistakes and entries that haven't been added to the list. And then I officially joined the Oryx team in July. So I think I've been helping them since like April or May.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. I know that Oryx's work caught my attention early on. I did a little bit of work in the first few months of the war, basically taking Oryx's losses and then comparing them against the reported losses of the Ukrainians, the Ukrainian General Staff and the Russian Ministry of Defense, to try to say, well, here are the upper and lower bounds, being the reported losses of each side, and then sort of Oryx's figures in the middle to try to establish a range of losses. So I imagine that you found his work right around the same time that I did. So do you, in your professional work, do you do anything that's related to this, whether it be information analysis, or do you work with vehicles like this to the extent you can tell us?
No, I do GIS.
Oh, okay. All right. So, you might be interested in speaking a little bit with our guest, David, who is developing some mapping software later on. And obviously there are some great GIS folks who are heavily involved in mapping in connection with the war. So if you work in GIS, how did you come to learn so much about the equipment? Because you seem like a real expert.
You can learn a lot over a few months.
Yeah, undoubtedly. You must have been pretty focused on it. And so had you been doing, a lot of these people, a lot of who do related work, Oryx in particular, and many of those who work with him began tracking these events or similar events in connection with the Syrian war. Had you ever done tracking like this just on your own or for another project?
No, this is the first time I've done something like this.
Oh, okay. So what caught your attention? Why did you want to do it in this case? Is it specific to Ukraine, or is it just because it was, the major thing in the news and you thought you could help?
I first became most interested through the Twitter threads made by Dan Spian, if you recognize the name.
Yeah, I've been following him for a long time, so I know all the regular contributors pretty well. Yeah.
So he was making threads that actually gave context to the losses, and that specifically is what got me interested in the losses themselves, but also the military units that were involved in the different axes of the war. And it was through him that I actually got into contact with the Oryx team and started to give them corrections and losses that weren't on the list.
Okay. And so did it start, when you say you can learn a lot over a few months, did it start pretty modestly? Were they just minor corrections here and there? And, your skills have grown over the months?
Yeah, I actually started out with truck duplicates because the Oryx team, they don't really like checking them as much because they're more interested in the actual armor equipment. And so I went through those and issued a lot of corrections, but then I branched out and did corrections for basically all the different equipment types.
So really that, the old analogy of starting at the bottom or starting in the mailroom, and in this case, it was starting with just trucks, which is a pretty great story. And so, in order to do this work, obviously you've had to learn a lot in a short amount of time. How have you studied up on the different equipment that you're identifying? Do you have a couple of resources you worked with heavily to, develop that knowledge base?
Nothing specific. There's quite a few different Russian sites that have info, but there isn't really a single resource for all equipment types. But there's also different ways that you can learn about the equipment. So what we look for are visual distinctions, right? Whereas others might learn more about the technical details of the interior of the equipment, which as people counting the equipment losses, we're not going to need to know as much.
Yep, which makes a lot of sense. So you must have a real attention to detail then, right? Like, do you think that the rate at which you have learned how to do this work is the sort of thing that others could pick up if they wanted to?
I don't know, but I think as long as someone's interested in this stuff, they could definitely learn a lot.
Well, I love to hear that, the encouragement. So if you're listening and you've had an interest in this kind of work, or perhaps you may even have begun it on your own, keep going. And it sounds like by reaching out to Dan, you made a real connection that allowed you to integrate yourself into a team. So would you recommend that for others? Is, like, for example,
yeah, absolutely. We, or at least I, really think people should reach out to us more. Currently, people don't actually send us stuff enough through DMs. So, and if there's an interest, then absolutely they can get involved as well.
Well, then I guess, guys, you heard it here first. That's interesting, because every so often I've seen Jacob and others on the team say, hey guys, I get tagged in the same content too often.
Yeah.
Is there, if people wanted to send material to you, do you have any suggestions about how to filter what would be useful? Like, should people be checking it against the existing image database in some kind of a way, or just take their shot?
With the drone footage, I think to most people, it's more of a pain to actually compare through the database. So for that, I would say, see if a bunch of the other accounts are posting it before tagging and sending it to us. But if there is like a Ukrainian news site that publishes photos or something, and you haven't seen it before on Twitter, then definitely at least let me know. I know Jacob gets a lot because he's the main guy basically for the list right now.
Yeah, so if you're able to tell us, obviously I followed Oryx Spienkop and Dan Spien and Jacob Janowski and yourself. Are there very many others on the team at the moment, or are you able to say?
Well, there's the names at the top of the list, but the main contributors right now are Jacob, myself, and we're also getting helped by Aloha, who's a listener right now, actually. And he's not an official member of the team, but he's joined the chat to help with actually sourcing the war spotting entries, which is the other list that I'm involved with.
Oh, well, that's an interesting point, because I know there are several initiatives to track losses. Can you explain to us, are there very many differences in the approach of Oryx and war?
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
Oh, I was asking, since you're working with Oryx and you're also working with war spotting, are there different styles or different approaches to how they're tracking, or are they essentially similar efforts, just, you know, having more eyes on it is good, and so having two efforts, you know, has its own benefits?
I think the Oryx list is more focused on counting rather than documenting multiple pieces of media for each loss and sourcing and everything. So because the Oryx list was the first Western list that made the rounds, it's the one that people reference. But war spotting tried to take a more methodical approach of getting all the source material and different pieces of media for each loss. And war spotting is also more conservative in how it tracks certain types of losses.
Okay, so know what kind of software war spotting uses to build its database of media?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Yeah. Do you know what kind of software war spotting uses in order to build its media database?
I haven't actually asked him, but it's a Ukrainian guy.
Okay.
But I don't know what his backend is.
Okay, but that's interesting, because I'd imagine that by having an attempt to have every copy of media that shows a loss, it makes it duplicates. So do you rely on war spotting's catalog to do a lot of your duplicate checking?
Sorry, your mic is cutting out.
Go ahead, exit. Why don't you run through? Yeah.
Sorry, Michael, you're fine. I think it might be Nelsio's mic that might be having a problem.
Okay. So we'll do the best we can. Right. I'm just wondering, since Nalcio has the backdated version, maybe we'll do the best we can. If it continues to be a problem, we may ask you just to cycle down and join again, because sometimes that will resolve Twitter audio problems. Let me know if you have trouble hearing me. My question was, do you use war spotting's database to do most of your duplicate checking?
Yes, I almost exclusively use the war spotting database now.
And so are you involved in the source material, or do others collect and you just analyze?
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
So it might be best, just to make everything run a little more smoothly, if one of my co-hosts could suggest to Nalcio that he might just cycle down and back up, and hopefully that will resolve any audio problems. And apologies to the listeners, but this is just how it goes sometimes with live audio. But I'm glad that we finally got him joining us, and I'm already learning a fair bit. Okay, let's see. Welcome back. Am I coming through any better for you now? So, Nalcio, are you hearing?
Can you hear Michael at all?
Yes, I can hear.
Okay. So, Nalcio, are you collecting the media as well, or do others do the collection and you just do analysis?
I save all the media I find.
Oh, okay. So you're doing collection as well. Where do you collect the media from?
Predominantly Facebook and TikTok.
That's interesting. You usually hear
So
about.
most of the ground footage comes from TikTok, and photos come from Facebook.
Exit, did you want to go ahead with the question?
Yeah, that was one of the things that I was kind of wondering. So typically you guys don't really get submissions from people who might actually be actively on the battlefield anywhere, or?
Yeah, that's correct. Soldiers aren't sending us anything. So what we find on TikTok is occasionally there will be soldiers who have TikTok accounts. Other times it's civilians filming stuff. With Facebook, it's usually either civilians doing charity who happen to see the losses, or it's the relatives of people in the military who post photos while trying to get money for, cars and drones, things like that.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I'm kind of surprised though, because I honestly thought that people might want to brag about some of the cool things that they've done, and I thought that that might be more of a occasion for you to get information from people. But that's interesting to me.
Yeah, if I wish they did. I wish they did, but the closest we've had is I guess a reporter sending Jacob some photos. But beyond that, it's all open source stuff.
So this is the official call out for anybody on the ground. By all means, send us your brags, because we want to be able to count them and get direct information from you.
So I've attempted a bit of a tech reset here. Can you hear me any better now?
Yes.
Okay,
Sounds
perfect.
better.
Perfect. So, at one point, when the Pentagon was coming out with loss estimates, they were suggesting that the Oryx list, back in the late summer, maybe reflected about 80% of losses. Do you think that the list is still in that range, maybe 80%, 75% of losses, or do you think it's caught up or fallen behind?
I'd say it depends on the type of equipment and what front you're looking at. So for a place like Kiev, armor losses were probably closer to 95% documented. But for any Russian-occupied territory, the numbers would be much lower. But for the list in general, especially for armor, I think like 75 to 85% is a good range. Truck losses are undercounted across the board.
Just because truck losses aren't viewed as significant, and so they're not photographed as often?
They're not viewed. They're not photographed as often, and civilians don't necessarily know that they're military, especially if they're burnt wrecks. So regular truck losses just aren't filmed or documented as much.
Right, and so you think that the Ukrainian or the losses by the Russians are documented more fully because the Ukrainians are doing a better job at photographing and publishing the losses?
Yeah, it kind of cuts both ways though, because a lot of the Ukrainian losses on like the fronts that have been liberated territory, those were also filmed by Ukrainians and Ukrainian civilians. So
right,
the Ukrainians documented both the Russian losses and the Ukrainian losses.
But the regions that are controlled by Ukraine generally have much better reporting.
Yes.
Okay. Do you think that are most of your are most of your media sources photographs, or lately it seemed like we're seeing a lot more drone reconnaissance video to count losses? Is that just because the the front line has been a little bit more fixed, and so it's maybe more dangerous to get up to the zone where the losses are occurring. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of the destroyed equipment we saw in autumn was actually destroyed earlier in the summer and spring, but for when the front lines are more stagnant, there isn't as much coming from the front itself, except through the drone footage like we're seeing now. So once there's more movement, then actual ground footage will start to appear more.
Okay.
Most of the ground footage we're getting right now are from liberated areas that aren't really seeing combat.
Right, which makes a lot of sense. And so the Ukrainians are posting on TikTok and Facebook then?
Yeah, so for a lot of the ground footage we're getting right now, it's in like demining operations that they're filming this stuff.
Oh, that's interesting context. Exit, did you want to go ahead with the question?
Yeah, that kind of your truck comment. I know that Oryx had posted the other day something about not all trucks are or not talking about not necessarily including civilian equipment. And you might not know, but I track the grain deal and pay attention to some of the stolen grain stuff. And we've seen military vehicles trucking grain. And so it occurred to me that I wonder, like, how do you define a military truck, for instance, that you guys would actually track versus other vehicles that you might not track? Like, is there a really specific set of criteria that you guys are using for deciding which things you're tracking? Or is it just kind of up to the person who's doing the actual ID on that vehicle?
The criteria we're using right now is if it was purpose built for the military, then it's documented. But if it's a truck that was converted from civilian to military use, it's not documented.
So painting it green does not make it a military vehicle. That's what I'm hearing.
No. And if that were the case, we'd have hundreds upon hundreds of potential Ukrainian equipment entries. And you could argue that there's value in that kind of counting, but it's very difficult, especially because those losses would be very spotty and difficult to count, because there'd be, in many cases, it'd be impossible to distinguish military from civilian because they're like the same equipment.
Okay, so we'll jump back into questions in just a moment. I'll take a moment to sort of reset that if you've joined us, we're chatting with Nalcio, who is tracking equipment losses in connection with the war in Ukraine, working on the team with Oryx. And ours is a space that we're holding Thursdays and Sundays to bring together people interested in OSINT, not only to hear the news, but also to build your skills and maybe meet some people who you might want to work together, to try to build the community up and get people collaborating. Just a reminder that Friends of the Space are on Twitter, or excuse me, Friends of the Space. So if you want to check that out, the link to that is in the nest. And that we will take questions for Nalcio. I know that lots of you have come to speak to him. We'll probably ask questions for another 10 minutes or so, and then we'll invite the audience up. So if you have questions, consider those and request a mic. We'll start bringing people up in a few minutes. So I was curious, what effect, Nalcio, what effect do you think that decoys have had on the battlefield? Do you think they've been pretty accurate? Like you've thought, oh, that piece of equipment that's been destroyed, and then you got, an alternate view that revealed it was a decoy?
That's a very difficult question. I think they have had an effect, but it's a lot of the time there's footage where it's suspected to be a decoy, but we can't be 100% sure.
So do you guys, when you say you can't be 100% sure, do you assign any kind of like a confidence assessment to each rating? Do you know what I mean? Or like even wide brackets of, you know, essentially confirmed, you know, fairly certain, and then, you know, we need more detail to be like, how do you establish those bands of confidence?
The confidence is mostly whether or not we agree with each other on a particular case, because it's all case by case, right? Sometimes the footage is so poor, it's almost impossible to tell. But if there's drone footage and there's a strike about something that doesn't quite look right and there aren't any secondary explosions, things like that, we might agree that it's more likely to be a decoy than real. But again, it's very iffy and difficult. And the problem is also that the Russians have a habit of clipping their drone footage of these strikes so that it's hard to tell what actually happens after the hit.
Okay, so it's interesting that, you know, you guys are experiencing challenges as well, and that some of the decoys are good enough to potentially be tricking even you guys. Have you found that it's been easier to identify vehicles in summer, fall, winter? Does that make much difference to you?
I guess when there aren't leaves on the trees, you could see more, especially if there's like abandoned equipment that's behind some trees. Otherwise, the snow can make it annoying to identify some wrecks. But beyond that, there isn't a huge difference.
Okay. Exit, I think you might have another question. Would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, this is just kind of the general, what did you learn doing this that just shocked the heck out of you? You didn't expect to learn it in general, and specifically doing this job, tracking losses.
How much Russian soldiers steal and how often they just graffiti everything around them. It's just unreal because I've been scouring, of course, Kiev and Chernihiv oblasts for documentation and footage, and just there's always cars with the invasion markings on them. So in those cases, it would be V or O, and military units graffitiing the wreckage of a house that they probably caused to burn down. So that was the most shocking to me.
Does that graffitiing help you at all? In that, I know some. I think the user is Tom. His name is Tom, who used to work at Jane's. He's maintained, I believe, a list of vehicles that have unique writing on the side of them. Are you using that as a tool to identify as well?
I actually have my own list for tactical markings. And so the graffiti does confirm which units are there. Often they confirm what we already knew. So we know the 6th Tank Regiment is in this village, but then they graffiti on a house that burned down that they're there. So that just confirms it.
That's a great point. I hadn't considered about, you know, graffiti using unit numbers. So it's, I mean, it's kind of extra foolish, because it's not only might it be evidence of destruction of property or other crimes, but it also lets you track them.
And they also more commonly graffiti region codes. So each region of Russia has its own numerical code. So they write like 52 RU.
Mm-hmm. And okay, are those like telephone area codes, or what do they equate to? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they write whichever region they're from. So Belgorod region has its own code, for example, and then they write the code if they're from there, and they also write that code on their equipment often.
Mm-hmm. Exit, did you want to go ahead?
Yeah, just on that. So I saw that you did have the symbols thread. That was really interesting. Do you track patches and things of that nature as well?
Yes. patches are more straightforward because there's a lot of sites reselling patches from the different military units, unless they're like a brand new unit that we don't have as much info on. But generally, I'm in contact with people that can help with patches if I can't figure it out.
Is that a list that you guys keep yourself, or I know months and months and months ago, there had been some discussions with others about possibly having some kind of a database for patches specifically, but also obviously markings would be helpful as well. Is that something you guys have ever talked about publishing, or is there a specific place that you go to find that information that others could be using?
I have talked about it. It's actually not specifically the Oryx team's document. It's my document alongside the co-author, but the co-author isn't intent on releasing it publicly right now. But if people have questions about military tactical markings, then they're free to DM me and I can help them.
Well, that's generous of you. Early on in the war, occasionally Oryx would also talk about what looked like deliberate efforts to exaggerate losses by taking a piece of destroyed equipment and then, moving it or blowing it up a second time to make it, have more damage, and then photographing it again. And those efforts strike me as maybe being more relevant early on when total loss numbers were smaller. Do you still see them doing that? Are you guys catching attempts at that, or are we kind of past that?
Yes, the Russians recently shared another photo of a 2S1 that was photographed like 5 times before.
Oh, wow. Okay.
For some reason, it was one of those pieces of equipment that just kept being circulated. And the Russian Telegram doesn't care about whether or not it's actually new or not. They just regurgitate it and spread it. But that was really common back in the summer, where they would just photograph the same couple of BTR-3s and BTR-4s over and over again from different angles and different states of disrepair when they like remove the wheels and remove the headlights, stuff like that.
So this is a bit of a speculative question, but given the huge database that you guys would have developed just of images, among yourselves, have you ever talked about the potential to be using some kind of an AI system or a learning model that could digest your database in an effort to, be used to assist in IDing lost equipment?
I'm very skeptical of whether or not that would actually work, just because the conditions between all the different pieces of media are so different all the time. So the lighting, the setting may look completely different. You might have screen caps from a video alongside photos from Facebook, and the Facebook photos might be from a professional camera with a completely different focal length. Like there's so many little things that the AI very likely won't pick up on. And when something like an AI would get something right, it would be something basic like, this is a BMP2, or this is a destroyed BMP2. But actually comparing, like, unless it's extremely obvious, I don't think it would ever help that much.
So does that mean that, have you ever tried using any automated tools to identify, perhaps not the equipment, but, to identify duplicate background locations, or, is there any no, the automation just has not been helpful?
No.
No. Okay. You guys have been focused on vehicle identification. Every so often, I'm seeing people put up posts trying to identify parts of debris from missiles in an attempt to identify what munitions are used in a given attack. Do you ever work on that as well to try to identify missile types, or are you just focused on land systems?
I just focus on the land systems. I did months ago. I did look into Tochkas briefly before I was actually doing work with the equipment losses. But yeah, beyond that, I only really deal with actual equipment rather than small arms and missiles, things like that.
Okay. So a lot of people are expecting an offensive to be launched by the Ukrainians in the next few months. In past offensives, the Ukrainians have asked for a media blackout, in connection with the Kherson offensive. How does something like that affect you? Does that, slow down the input rate of examples you can look at? Do you hold off on publishing your analysis for a longer time, or do you hold it entirely? How are you anticipating you'll deal with that?
Usually it's a trickle down anyway. So if there's a so-called media blackout, most of the footage would be drone footage published by the official military unit pages on Facebook. And then the occasional TikTok video might appear, but not enough would trickle down to us anyway for it to be a problem.
Okay.
So we don't really get footage that we aren't allowed to share. The only instances where we're careful about source links are when they're Russian VK pages that we don't want to compromise. But that's it's very uncommon to have that.
I see. So you actually have access to some groups where if you published content you got from those groups, it might expose that you're somewhere they might not want you to be, and you might get kicked out. So that's a risk you're dealing with.
Yeah, so that's only really happened twice.
Oh, so there have actually been instances where you have in fact been kicked out?
No,
oh no?
There's only been 2 instances where I've withheld sources for that reason.
I see. Okay. So I imagine that in dealing with some of these photos and videos of the destroyed vehicles, you're also seeing, casualties and violence. Is that ever a challenge for you to deal with? Have you established rules or protocols for yourself, how you limit that or handle it?
One thing that I think helps in general is just to not have audio. Like I always mute TikTok and just as a rule. But in the case of graphic content, things like that, you get used to it after you've seen a certain amount.
Okay.
It's not pleasant, and I don't ever go out of my way to look at it, but you can become used to that kind of awful content.
I imagine you can. Although it strikes me that everybody has to be, mindful of sort of chronic exposure as well. So a question that flows from that, when you said earlier you'd love for people to send you more content, and since you say you get a lot of this from TikTok, have you trained your TikTok algorithm, or do you have just lists of specific accounts on TikTok that you follow? As in, if somebody wanted to help you, since you've said you'd love to have more people send you content, do you have like a list of TikTok accounts that somebody could sign up for to do this specifically to get content to help you out?
I guess they could look up my name on TikTok. It's the same as my Twitter name, and just follow what I follow. If
That's a good
public.
idea. That's a good idea. That's interesting. Okay.
But beyond that, it's just like and watch the stuff that's relevant.
So
and
really, you're training the algorithm.
Yeah, it'll eventually just train itself if you're watching the relevant stuff. But
okay.
And then once it runs out of videos to show you, you'll just get, miscellaneous stuff that isn't relevant.
which might not be a bad break for your mental health. Although maybe you get distracted and maybe you get distracted and do a little less work.
Most of the footage isn't graphic at all. Like, it's actually quite uncommon.
Okay.
It was much more common earlier in the war, actually, because now we're getting, EOD videos where the bodies have been already taken away months ago.
Okay. So I guess that's an invite for people to go on TikTok, look up Nalcio's name. Is it Nalcio26 on TikTok?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I might even go in. We've had a debate in this space as well about use of TikTok and its, personal security risks and sort of strategic value risks. So just a reminder that if people are keen to do that, be conscious of why you're doing it and maybe set it up in on a device that might be a little more secure for that purpose. Just a reminder to the audience that we'd love to have questions for Nalcio. I only have 2 or 3 questions of my own left, and then we'll go to audience questions. So do feel free to request the mic. It's the button on the bottom left of the space. And if you're enjoying the conversation, you'd like to bring other people in, then please retweet the space. It's on the bottom right. So, question then, is there anything you can think of in terms of tools that would make your work easier? We've talked to some other people who do different types of tracking who would like access to specific databases like flight trackers or ship trackers. Is there any kind of software that would be useful to you, or would it be helpful if you had any more direct contacts to Ukrainian forces or say to Russian mill bloggers or access to Telegram groups? Can you think of anything that would help you?
Definitely access to sources, any kind of sources. So if there's private Telegram groups we don't know about that would have media, then absolutely that would be a very good thing to have. Contact with people on the front that are taking these photos would be very helpful. Because right now, the main limitation is just poor source quality and having to find everything ourselves.
Okay.
And
go ahead.
A lot of time people upload in like the worst way possible. So TikTok often has the ability to upload photos in decent resolution, but then sometimes they just upload it in a video slideshow instead, so the photos are really poor quality. I just wish people would cooperate more with us, but obviously, like, they're not gonna necessarily be thinking of the work we do. We're just on the sidelines watching.
Do you ever try to reach out to some of these accounts to say, the photo that you took was of something rare? Do you have a better quality version, or can you do you have a copy you could send to me?
TikTok has never worked, but messaging people on Facebook has worked before, and so the people on Facebook are more cooperative.
That's interesting. So sources, is there any kind of software that would make your life easier, or do you think you're pretty well set?
I can't really think of anything specific.
Okay. So, maybe a bit of a funny question. I know Oryx has started a list of the types of Russian equipment that have not yet been destroyed, that he's slowly counting down. Do you think that ultimately everything on that list is going to wind up having at least one example destroyed, or or alternately, what do you think is most likely to survive toward the end?
Yeah, will they actually put an armada in combat? That's a good question.
So that's one you'll be watching for, is the T-14?
Yeah, as an example, I think quite a few of them will be lost, but I wouldn't necessarily wager that they will all be lost, or if even 90% will be lost. Like, it's really hard to say.
It strikes me that some of the, for example, Oryx added 2 items to the list today, and I think that might be because they're extremely rare, sort of new creations. And so I'm also mindful that as their armorers get more desperate and or creative, the list might expand a little bit as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just as a common question I like to ask, is there anything that you've learned from doing this tracking we haven't discussed that you think it would be helpful for the audience to hear about? Anything you'd like to add just in general before we go to audience questions?
If you're publishing this stuff on Twitter or sending us this media, please include sources and please include relevant information such as location.
So would you, if people are sending you material, would you prefer they send it to you in Twitter DMs, or is there some other way you'd prefer to receive it?
Twitter DMs work perfectly well. If they want to post it themselves, they're free to do so and then just link to where they posted it. But if they're posting it on Twitter, you need to include the source link, because I don't want to have to DM you for the source link every single time something gets tweeted out.
Yeah. If you don't, are you able to use it?
Sorry, you broke up a bit.
Yeah, sorry about that. If you don't receive a source link, can you use that picture?
Yes, we can still use it, but it's a thorn in our side, or at least it's a thorn in my side, because on war spotting, especially, we try to source every single entry. So if we never end up getting a source link, then we're going to have probably a worse version of the media. And often the actual relevant information, such as location, can be lost, and we'd have to get that somewhere else.
That makes sense. I have two quick questions for you. When you see NATO countries come out with their hey, we're going to send this new aid package now, do you dread those days, or are you excited to add new things to look for?
Well, I'm excited with any NATO aid. I think losses are a normal part of war, so it isn't surprising when stuff is lost.
Fair.
So,
Maybe
no,
I worded that incorrectly. Do you look at the list and think, oh man, I have so many things to learn about and learn how to ID?
that's a fair point. Yeah, so if a bunch of new NATO equipment gets introduced, then yes, there'd be a lot more to learn, especially for destroyed equipment, because you'd have to learn the ins and outs of how to distinguish the types of destroyed equipment. So yeah, that is something you'd have to do. But I don't dread that. It can be fun to learn.
I imagine you don't get into this unless you find that fun to begin with. And then one last one for me. What's the most unique identifier that you've used to ID a piece of equipment as either new or previously identified?
One people don't know about that's very, very useful is to look at truck suspension brackets between the rear wheels to identify whether or not it's a Kamaz or a Ural. So depending on the shape, if it's like a squarish shape, it's more likely a Kamaz, but if it's a different kind of leaf shape, it's a Ural.
That's really interesting. Now we all know. We'll have to start looking for that. Aaron, go ahead with your question.
Hi there. I'll tell you, Nelsale, it is an honor to speak to you. I'm Aaron Balma. I'm the owner or host of the Balma Report. I'm a military analyst, military historian, and autism advocate. Your mindset is kind of like mine: statistics, data, military weapon systems, whatnot. I'm autistic, and so in doing this work, you know, a lot of statistics help, like data. Do you find that your mind is kind of it's very visual, as far as learning about vehicles, as far as learning about say BMP3s, and then learning about BTR 82s, and because I follow your work greatly, and I have it in the space a lot, and so yeah, thanks.
Yes, I'd say I'm a visual person. A lot of this is visual recall, and it's a lot of the time easier to remember, at least for me, to remember things visually than the details.
Yeah,
per se.
so I don't know whether you're autistic as well, but I mean it's an awesome ability to have, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm not autistic or anything, but and I don't know how common it is either, but it's just something I have, is the ability to have the visual recall to recognize if something's new or not, and to whether or not it's a certain equipment type.
Yeah, and it's awesome. It's awesome, and it's a lot of fun even just diving into seeing what's new out there, like what they're gonna get, and then what's. But yeah, thanks a million, and all right, awesome job.
Thanks.
So actually, a follow-up question on that, Nalcio. When you say you remember something, do you just remember having seen it, or are you able to remember where in the database? Do you know what I mean? Like, are you able to associate it with, oh, this is, entry number X, or this occurred in this time period, and then you search in that window? Like, how does that work?
A lot of the time I see something and I know what it is and where it is. So the hull of the BMP is twisted in a certain way. Therefore, it's this Ukrainian BMP, one in Oleksandriva, Kherson Oblast.
That's pretty impressive. I was about to ask, in your database, what sorts of tags do you have associated with the pictures? Do you have, location as precisely as possible, and date, and like, are you able to tag other context around it, like
yes,
unit and?
So on War Spotting, I guess the admin had this idea, but he introduced this pretty comprehensive tagging system. At first, it was to distinguish between turret lists and not turret-less equipment, because the BMP2 list was getting out of hand just because of how many entries there are. So we needed a way to distinguish whether or not it retained its turret or not. And then that expanded to whether or not the equipment was shattered, is the word we used for if it's completely destroyed in a million pieces. And then we introduced tags for the IFFs that the Russians use, so you can filter for whether or not it has a Z or a O or a V. And there's a couple of other tags that we use, like BMP2s can have the PL ones on them.
So they wind up being fairly specific tags to the, right down to vehicle details, which is interesting.
Yeah. So with tanks, mine plows and mine rollers, that's another tag we use. And altogether, now that pretty much everything's tagged, it's very useful. And it actually makes things a lot easier if you don't have good location info for a given loss.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. I apologize that I don't know. I haven't looked at the War Spotting database. Is that open to the public, or is that just internal?
The Russian losses are all open.
Oh, okay. That's an interesting distinction. So if people are curious about how that tagging system works, they could go and look it up personally in that case.
Yep.
Oh,
Yep.
Great. Okay. Okay. Well, thanks to the people with hands up for being patient. We'll keep going. We'll come back to Aaron in a moment. We'll just go around. Jacoby, I think you were next. Would you like to go ahead?
Sure. Thank you. This is really interesting to listen to. Thanks for being here, Nalcio, and being so patient with all the glitches and whatnot. I'm really curious about the collaboration that you have with the team that you work with and how you collaborate, investigating the different pieces that you're able to identify. You know, how do you interact in a way that you are able to best identify the vehicles you're seeing, the duplications that you're coming across, how you track and deduplicate all the information that you're looking at in an efficient way, or maybe it isn't terribly efficient and it's extraordinary work.
In terms of something controversial, we just discussed. So with the Orcs team, we have a group chat on Twitter. And then with the War Spotting team, we have a Telegram chat. So if there's something that's questionable, we will just discuss it and find a solution. For flagging duplicates, we have a system on War Spotting for flagging everything. And because each entry has a unique ID, we can easily point out what the entry is a duplicate of, and then flag it and hide it on the public end so the public doesn't actually see the duplicate.
I find it fascinating how these systems are being gradually built up and how early little improvements really, cascade and become quite valuable. It was interesting just a few weeks ago, Geolocated put out, GeoConfirmed, of course. GeoConfirmed put out their website, with their full database. And it's amazing to see it come from just a site that was, getting tagged so it could aggregate geolocations to now it has, a fully formed database and it's all publicly available and searchable. So it's really interesting seeing how these tools have been built up by teams of volunteers. I think we'll go Brad and then Aaron. Go ahead, Brad.
Hey, thanks for joining us. And I hope things aren't too loud. I'm driving in a car, but something that has occurred to me during this conversation is that, you have this massive database of images that I'm coming from like a tech background. That seems like it would be an amazing repository to start training computer vision models. In other words, AI-based, learning models that essentially would put you in a position to create an app that does a really good job at identifying different vehicles, even if they are in a semi-destroyed state. So I'll give you an example. Like, I use a whole bunch of apps that are like, hey, if I want to identify a plant, I've got like 3 different apps that all I have to do is just like get close enough to a leaf, and it identifies with incredible accuracy the species of that plant. Same thing with rocks, the same thing with like birds. Like, these are like, the technology is pretty tremendous. It's come a really, really long way. And I'm wondering if you've ever considered building such an app. And I've got another follow-on question after that.
So just to cut in before Nalcio, you're welcome to respond. Brad, we did chat about this briefly before, and Nalcio was skeptical about whether those systems would be effective. So I just want to rephrase to you, Nalcio. I know you're skeptical. If anybody listening were working in that field or were able to connect you with somebody working in that field, despite your skepticism, would you be open to trying to work with somebody on that?
Yeah, if they're willing to actually try to train the model and everything, then I'd be happy to send them the media and everything. But we're not going out of our way to try to get something like that, because a lot of the time the details are so minor that I don't think you can reasonably expect the AI model to be consistent enough to ever be useful.
Which leads to my next point, which is, from what I can tell, you're approaching this problem from the standpoint of looking at Twitter, looking at Telegram, looking at posts of people that are out in the field, which are not really tailored for what you're doing, which is trying to identify all of this equipment and chronicle it. And it would be amazing if you had an app that actually helped people chronicle their experience of the war while essentially getting the information that you need in a way in which it's formatted. I'll give you an example. You have somebody in the field who comes across a broken down vehicle. You could actually gamify a situation where you have people competing to see who can identify the most vehicles, and you have this person take their camera, walk around that vehicle, take different shots from different angles of different parts of the vehicle, and the app using computer vision could tell them a probability percentage of which thing it is. And the more images they take and the more details they get, you can see that probability of a correct identification go up. In other words, I think that and then the output of this thing for them would be essentially media that is highly suited for either a Telegram post or a TikTok post or a Twitter post. In other words, it's like setting them up to be able to tell their story of the war while killing the other bird of getting you high definition information, that pins down location. I mean, OPSEC would be a thing that would need to be considered, and you could build in a delay of, hey, don't post this for 7 days or something to that effect. You could build in some implicit like OPSEC procedures within the thing. I'm just riffing here, so but it seems to me that at some point you're going to want to leverage the tech, and you're going to want to leverage people on the ground by getting them to use something not for your purposes, but for their purposes, and having the nice side benefit of giving you highly detailed information that makes your lives easier.
That's an interesting idea. And I think for anything like that, if someone were to create that sort of application, I'd be more than willing to, trial it, and if people are actually willing to adopt it. But
it'd kind of be the type of thing that you guys would have to create, and hire a developer team, and but there are like startup competitions with like the military. There might be like grant funding that you can get for something like this. So there's lots of different ways of approaching, but you would need to find a good CTO that has product experience to come in. My guess is that you're not going to have the skills on your team as currently constituted to do something like this. You'd have to partner with like a startup type person with CTO experience, specifically in computer vision and machine learning.
Well, it strikes me that short of there being somebody in the space who might work in this field, which is entirely possible, that I know some of us have connections, for example, to the Ukrainian Ministry of Digital Transformation, and they've been very innovative in terms of developing apps, both to have citizens contribute spotting of Russian equipment and to track infrastructure battle damage, like destroyed buildings, destroyed infrastructure. So I wonder if, it may not be super high priority, but I wonder if it's the sort of thing that some folks in Ukraine might start some work on, because it sounds like they've already gone down that road a little ways. But in any event, who works in software or has connections, now you know that Nalcio is very into this subject and he has access to some databases, and so maybe something will develop. Okay, we'll go to Aaron, and that may be our last question for Nalcio, and then we'll move on to.
I'll just say that. I'll just say that the most important thing if there's anyone listening that can actually document this stuff, the most important thing is to just take photos from all the different angles of the equipment, because that's by far the best way to document this equipment.
I think just to very, very quickly comment, I think the point that I was trying to make is that nobody's, if it's just the average troop on the front, nobody's going to think to do that for you. If you get a hold of it, it'll be by chance because you found it online. You would have to create a user experience that kind of gamifies that whole situation and turns it into some type of social experience that also makes it easy for them to post on other platforms that they're already using. So you have to solve a problem for them in order to solve your problem. I guess that's the point that I was trying to make.
It strikes me that there might also be space for an interim solution that isn't just somebody on the ground taking pictures, which is obviously the most valuable, but that, you know, since Nalcio is saying it would be great for others to contribute to them by just flagging things that are already up on social media, if there were some kind of, you know, plugin or like an upload system of photo and video where it could scan it against a database to see if it's original or not and sort of automate at least the workflow for the identification team, and then but kind of give people incentive to contribute beyond just, hey, Nalcio, here are pictures. If they made it a little bit easier to, you know, even if it's integrated into the flow of Instagram or TikTok or somehow related, and you just paste the source link in, and then it automatically pulls it down and passes it to the team. You know, I suspect there are a couple of intermediate software things that might make things a little bit faster.
I mean, like a Chrome extension with a leaderboard and different competitions and like an Intel sprint that occurs over a specific time frame. So many different ways you could gamify this, so to speak, and get people involved. Like even just like the little competitions, Michael, that we used to do on geolocating, where you essentially crush the rest of us. You know, all that stuff was super fun, right? And to your point, you don't necessarily need to be on the ground in order to, you know, participate in this type of thing. And but I do think coming up with a clever way of making it fun, making a super dark subject fun for people who want to contribute their time and intelligence and effort. I don't know. There's something there. It's worth looking at.
And so who knows what will come of this, if anything, but these are the sorts of brainstorming exercises where we may be able to connect people who have access to data and skills, you know, to people who do some of the software work. So we'll go to Aaron, who has his hand up for the last question for Nalcio, and then we'll move on to a slightly different conversation. Go ahead, Aaron.
Thanks. You guys hear me okay? All right. So, Nalcio, what would be one of the categories where you know, we see a lot on the list of, like, say, unidentified tanks, unidentified vehicles? Would that be because of lower resolution photos, photos that are too dark? I'm assuming that those would be two major factors. Are you guys using software that can enhance visualize photos? For the photos or videos, anything from, you know, of course you can get, there's all kinds of different apps you can use, but there's different software you can buy that some are better than others, and I'm assuming that is because there's lack of visualization or lack of details where it can be designated as in, you know, an unidentified tank. I certainly would like to keep in touch with you guys and maybe even help you guys. It's awesome. I want to get in touch with you guys. You guys are doing great.
Yes, we know about that sort of thing, but the biggest issue with any kind of AI upscaling is that it can't create detail if it's not there in the initial footage. So
that's right.
Any attempt to upscale a low quality screen cap from a video, or to upscale the video itself, wouldn't create the necessary detail to identify the equipment. It would just make the video maybe better to look at, but the actual information we need wouldn't just be created out of thin air.
No, and that's interesting. I mean, with the light, whatever light is there, whatever light isn't there, you can enhance them. But yeah, I can see exactly what you mean. Absolutely.
Actually, that's inspired one last question for me, which is, when you hear about some of the other OSINT groups like Bellingcat, and they talk about retaining their evidence or retaining their media with a sort of chain of custody and to a standard that it could potentially be used as evidence, has there been any discussion in the groups you've worked in about, if there's anything in the videos that might be helpful potentially to war crimes investigations or otherwise, retaining things in any particular way for evidentiary value?
I have spoken to people about this. Spoken to a journalist about figuring out which units were in a particular village at a given time. But we haven't specifically talked about the retaining of media for this type of thing. But it's definitely something I've thought about. And like I said, I keep everything regardless. So all the media is going to be there.
The reason it came to my mind is that, you could keep the original, of course, but that if you start altering the image or video in an effort to, clarify detail, then it may potentially tamper with its evidentiary value. So yeah, that's just what inspired me.
Yeah, I keep the original versions of everything.
Well, it's great that you have that in mind. Exit, did you want to come in with the last question?
Just one quick clarification, because I had a listener ask, you have mentioned specifically Facebook and TikTok. You guys do use some feeds off of Telegram as well, I presume. Is that correct?
Yes, but with Telegram, usually we would need people to send us the links. And beyond that, we correspond a lot with the Lost War in UA Telegram channel, which is also documenting losses. So they're a very helpful source as well, and it's the best Telegram source for this sort of work. And so we share info with each other and help each other.
Okay, well, thank you very much. In an effort to summarize some takeaways for the audience, Nalcio would be very happy to have help in spotting content to track losses, that a lot of it comes up on TikTok and Facebook, that if you want to go out and look for these sorts of things, you could go and find him at his Twitter username, Nalcio26, on TikTok to follow the accounts that he follows. That you can send any material that you find to him via Twitter DM, but if you do, make sure you include the source link as well. And that if you have access to any contacts on the ground, if you know people in Ukraine or near the front line who may be taking these kinds of photos, that would be helpful as well. So reach out to Nalcio to try to connect him there, or if you're in any private Telegram groups or the like, where you may also have access to content that's not otherwise publicly available, consider reaching out to Nalcio to see whether you can help him out with any of that. So anyway,
one last thing is the hardest thing for us to navigate is VK, because there's a lot of photos on VK, but it's not as straightforward to search for everything on VK. So if there are people that actually happen to know a bunch of accounts on VK and have access to all these different photos of losses on VK, then sending us those would be extremely helpful.
Okay, thanks for that last point. That's a good point. So Nalcio, thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate your persistence in having to overcome the Android phone bug that Twitter had introduced. That I appreciate that you had to scramble to get that done, but I'm glad we were able to connect with you. And hopefully you've enjoyed your time chatting enough that if we reach out to you in another a month or two, maybe you'll come back and be able to update us on some of the progress you've made. And in particular, I would be curious to hear whether you generate any leads of people who begin helping you based on having heard about it in this space. So thank you very much, and hopefully you keep us in mind to come back again.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'd be happy to come back later.
Perfect. Okay, guys. So just before moving on to our next discussion, I'll just reset and remind everybody that we're having a conversation about OSINT news, and that tonight we have a couple of guests, so it's a little bit more interview focused. Once we, if we finish with our remaining guests tonight, we may turn around to sort of a roundtable discussion where we would promote a lot more conversation with the audience, sort of inspired by some of the latest good quality OSINT work here on Twitter. Whether with our next guest or with our open conversation afterward, you'd like to come up to speak, you can always request the mic. It's in the bottom left side of the Spaces screen. If you're enjoying the conversation and you'd like to get more people to engage with us, we always like more voices. Please retweet the space. It's in the bottom right of this space. And just a reminder that we, friends of our space, are streaming this on YouTube as well. We're still experimenting with it a little bit, but you might be interested to check it out. And the link to that YouTube stream, it's the second in the nest at the moment, so you can find it there. Exit, go ahead.
If you happen to be an Android owner and you're looking for the fix to all your ills with Twitter, up in the nest, you will note that I put the information from OSINT-69 about how to fix that for right now, and hopefully that'll help you out.
Yeah, these Twitter glitches sure are a frustration, and they're leading to a bunch of friction for us tonight. But I appreciate everybody who persisted while we had to run through some news and get Nalcio connected. I appreciate you hanging on. But we'll turn now to our conversation with David Rosnow, who is our second guest for tonight. David is a software developer. And a passionate advocate for Ukraine. And I noticed David in the spaces, months and months ago as a regular listener and sometimes speaker. And David works on a couple of different software apps, including Carzak, which is a low burden carpooling app, and an app called LiveMap. And beyond his participation here on Twitter, in the spaces, partly he came to my attention because that LiveMap app began to be used as a tool by some OSINT focused groups, particularly who were following developments in Iran several months ago when the wide-scale protests first began to kick off. And I watched several presentations that were done using David's software, which he, generously helped people get access to and get up and running. And I thought, it would be great to speak with a developer who's, enabling some of these collaborative OSINT efforts here on Twitter. So, David, thank you very much for joining us.
Very happy to be here. Go ahead.
So, you have been, as I noted, a longtime listener in the spaces. Do you have just a personal interest in OSINT? Do you have a particular interest in Ukraine that's carried over to Iran? What got you interested in this sort of community?
Well, I got interested in OSINT when I first learned about it, around February 24th last year. I wanted to follow Ukraine, and the best source of information were the OSINT spaces. So I started listening to them, and I realized the value of the verification and the expertise that was going towards, the teams of OSINT researchers that were working together and explaining their process on the spaces. The idea for the app came from trying to follow some of the conversations. What I would often find, especially in terms of the bigger spaces where you might have someone making a military update or wanting to talk through the details of what's happening on the ground, is that it became very difficult to follow the action without some visual aid. By the time I found the exact location that they were talking about, they'd often be moving, ready to move on to the next topic. So the app that I developed along with an engineer who I work with is really, it's less on the OSINT research side and on the presentation layer of OSINT, of an OSINT map that someone else might generate, so that we create a live a way for a speaker to operate the map for an audience live, and allows the speaker to guide the audience to a specific view area of the map, zoom in and show them different parts. This gets over one of the limitations of Twitter Spaces specifically, that they don't have a way to show live information, live visuals along with the space. Other than putting a link in the nest, which is sort of static, the spaces don't give you a way to share, live visuals. So this got around that.
And I love hearing just the inspiration of you saying, wow, there's a need here, and I can work to fill it. So
Mr. Bond, your microphone is really glitchy right now.
I will cycle once again. Perhaps David can just fill us in on how he connected with the Iranian groups.
Can we back up a second, Michael? Because I think first David was working with Language Learner, and it derived out of that.
Yeah, what happened was that once I realized that there was a possible solution here, or an app that could easily be built, we found that I started pitching the idea of using it in the spaces to different speakers, and the person that was most responsive to that was Language Learner, who had a live or nightly report at the time that he was giving to the Mira report. And it seemed to fit very well with the type of presentation that he was giving, where he was going around virtually going around a map of Ukraine, often referring to the map, but didn't have a way to show the exact location. So he started using it on a nightly basis, or whenever he was giving his report. And that I think when the Iranian space started up, they liked the work of Language and respected that. And they wanted to create a report that was modeled after the same style that he was using. So they created, their own Iran report that was using the same, using our app to display the different portions of the map. And then what we did was, so the maps that we're displaying are authored in a part of Google that lets a individual and an end user, or anyone is another way of saying it, anyone to build a map and put custom markers on the map. So in the case of Ukraine, there was a very rich map that was being updated with very high accuracy by Andrew Perpetua. And that was the one that Language was using in that space. And that worked very well. In the case of Iran, the team at Iran Report started building their own custom map, which they could do in Google. And then we added a button in the Live Guide Map app to display that one, so that when you decide to share a map, you can choose which map you want to show. And currently we have 4 options. You can display a native map, which is basically just a map view. And or you can pick Andrew's map, or you can pick the Iran Revolution map that is displayed by that at the time was being curated by Sean Rocky. And we also have a third map that I believe that was created by also for Ukraine by a person in Georgia, David Bashkavili. To be honest, I'm not sure how active he is still updating it. I'm assuming he is, but we kept that as an option too.
I didn't realize that was the live map then an app that was sort of spun off from your carpooling app. It wasn't an existing product. You sort of took a portion of it and developed it just for OSINT use on Twitter?
It was created literally overnight for the use in these spaces. It was not a pre-existing solution. It happens that in the Carpool app, we are integrating with lots of different services and lots of different existing libraries. And, one of them obviously is the, lots of different variations of maps, especially like Google Maps, Google SDKs. And then we also use a real-time messaging platform that, and really the app the Live Guide map was created in response to this need. It was not, it was sort of like a volunteer effort to spin up a solution to this problem, that didn't exist before.
Well, it's amazing you guys were engaging in that, because that sounds like exactly the sort of effort I'm hoping to encourage with these spaces. I wasn't aware that there were maps in use for Georgia as well. I also understand that the Iranian map that Sean isn't able to update it right at the moment. Are you still open to working with people who might want to be tracking developments in various parts of the world? Like if people were hoping to use the Live Map app, is it the sort of thing that they would have access to, or would they need to contact you in order to get the ability to build maps?
Well, to be clear, the maps are being built and edited within Google Maps. Within the feature set of Google Maps, there is an area called Build a Custom Map. And that is where they are building the maps. Then they will have a link which allows them to publish that map, and it has a unique identifier. Currently, and then if they'd like to, if they'd like to have that included in the Live Guide Map app, then currently they could just DM me and we can add it as an option in the set of maps. And to be clear, David Bakashvili is located in Georgia, authoring, at least as far as I know, authoring a map of Ukraine. He's not, the subject of the map is Ukraine.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And so really the live map, it's more about the distribution of a map composed through Google Maps. So it's if you have put the time in to build a product, then somebody could reach out to you to say, I would love to share this in a presentation style. Could we use your tool? Is that the right way to describe it?
Exactly. Yeah, they author it in Google Maps, and then we become the display layer for it to be shown to a live audience, as you would in a space.
So really, the tool set is based on the underlying Google Maps. And so for those who are curious, Riverside Kitty, one of our speakers who has been involved in some of those spaces, has now added to the nest some examples of the map, which they were put up by Sean a little over a month ago. And so, for example, in his tweets, the second one in particular, it says Live Guide Map, and then it gives an app code. and there's a 5-character code. And if you were to go and download the Live Guide map app, both iOS and Android, I know that I watched several of these presentations, so I have it myself. Then what you do is you punch in that 5-letter code, and that will zoom the map into the relevant region, and it will show all of the pins created via the Google Maps. So it's a pretty cool presentation technique on a platform like this.
And I've just added, I hope it's okay, I added to the Nest an active map, which I can now curate, that is live right now. So in the Nest, that first post is a live guide map that I now currently am able to control. And if you look at it, you'll see North America currently, and then, you know, people in the space, we could, you know, if they have an area which they want to discuss, then we can, you know, target different parts of the country, and I can update that according to those links. You know, if they were to upload that, if they were to download the app and, you know, enter that code, then I can actively move the map and they can see where it is.
Well, that's very cool as an example. So you know, if you're curious or you think this might be useful to you, I would encourage you to download the app. It's pretty lightweight, and check out how it functions. And you know, that might be the sort of thing you'd be interested in speaking to David about.
And just to add,
go ahead.
Just to add that the current app as it exists allows anyone to become a sharer. So if they want to show one of the existing maps, which includes Andrew's and Sean's and David's, and also a plain Google map, just for the use of discussing a subject, they can do that right now and use it in any space that they wish. Anyone who downloads the app has the capability to share. And if they'd like to have another custom map that they've created added to the system, then that's what they would need to DM me for.
Well, that's a pretty terrific option. I know that other people have attempted other solutions. So while Andrew has used your maps and systems, I know that he is now occasionally doing his presentations on Twitch instead, where he just uses screen sharing. But it's Twitch has a different audience than does Twitter. And so while Twitter Spaces doesn't allow for screen sharing very effectively anyway,
and that's really,
that's
really an amazing experience. Having Andrew guide his own map in Twitch with the full screen live animation is really, I mean, that's ideal. We're sort of working around the limitation of spaces, but you know, what Twitch offers there is more compelling because it's full, you know, live video. But it doesn't offer the same sort of interaction, you know, audience interaction as easily as you get on a Twitter space. So there's still merit to a Twitter space, but, you know, absolutely, the Twitch, you know, implementation is very cool.
Gurney, did you want to go ahead with your question?
Yeah, I just had a question for David there. David, maybe I'm not too familiar with the live map, but I'm very familiar with the Google sort of APIs there in some of those custom map layers. So just to help fill me in here, what is the value add of live map relative to somebody that's just sharing a Google custom layer there? And I just asked that. I haven't downloaded the app. I'm assuming it's in the App Store for Android or for iPhone. So what bridge is being connected there versus the ability to just share those links in Google and those map layers through the existing mechanism? And also, just to be fair, to ask what is required of the person downloading the app, whether it's subscription fees or advertisements. I just trying to understand that that additional layer there and what might be gained or lost in translation.
Specifically, the only thing that we're doing is we are listening to the speaker's view of the map. We're looking at his zoom level or her zoom level and the center of their map, and then publishing that on a secure channel to an audience so that their maps update live. So all we are doing is we're taking that existing map and allowing the speaker to control the audience's view. So it doesn't, so really it's just making, it's allowing the speaker who's controlling the map to curate the exact view and, you know, the exact zoom level and location of the map that is being displayed. So if you had someone who is explaining the details of a battle area, rather than having to tell the audience what portion of the map to look at or where to move their map slightly or refer to, you know, an exact roadway to understand what part of the map we're currently looking at, when the speaker moves their map, the audience's map will move right along with it in near real time. Nothing is required of the audience in terms of cost. There's no authentication required by the audience. All they need to do is enter in the 5-digit code that the speaker shares on the space or that is in the tweet, you know, that explains the map. So like I put above, if you had the app and you entered in that code, then you would be, you know, your view would be under my control, and you would see the portion of the map which I'm currently talking about, which if you had that open, you would see Portland currently, and I've now zoomed in to a building in Portland, the Modern Machinery building, which is right next to S&M Auto Sales, and you would see that exactly on your map without having to touch your screen at all.
Well, thanks very much for that description. I think we'll run through hands. I apologize I didn't see the order, but we'll go Brad and then Aaron. Go ahead, Brad.
Hey, David. So I've used your app for a while. I found it very useful. I used to be on Language Learners updates, and one of the things I really like about it is the fact that, you know, I can essentially, even though the presenter has control of the screen, I can still kind of grab control and like zoom in and do things on my own, and then go back to where the presenter's at and let them take over again. And so I think that that's a super neat feature. And one of the things that I'm wondering about is there a way to integrate Google Earth data into this, such that, let's say we're talking about Bakhmut, right? And the presenter is zoomed in. It would be really neat to be able to kind of switch layers, see a satellite map, zoom in,
I
see
think we've
pictures
lost
of
Brad.
specific.
David, did you want to go ahead and answer the portion of his question that we heard? I think he's asking if it's possible to integrate portions of the information from Google Earth.
We could all hear Brad. I
Yeah,
think you're the only one.
I think I could hear him. It's a great idea. We haven't, I think that sounds very achievable, as long as, you know, it's just a matter of resources, and, you know, how much, you know, it's a free app, and, you know, the audiences for it are, I think, I'm very glad to see people using it, but it's not like it's reaching a huge number of people. So it's just, to me, it's been a question of how much resources should, you know, how much more resources should we put into it? Is it still, you know, to what extent is it still meaningful to people when a speaker picks it up and starts using it a lot, as Language did, as they did in the Iranian spaces? Then I thought it had a lot of value, but it seemed like their needs were largely met. But I think generally the question of is what would be the next steps that one would take with a solution like this? To me, you know, an obvious thing would be to add additional content to it so that you're not, you know, you're not restricted to just the map surface, that we could add additional layers of, you know, information. which to me is like overall one of the things that I would like to see. I think would be very compelling for OSINT. Both, to me, the big challenges are once you have verified information, or once you have trusted people verifying information, how do you display it? And the obvious things to do would be both in a map and on a timeline. And ideally, you'd combine those two into an experience where you could see the progress of things happening over time, geographically and on the map, and also visually in terms of other types of content.
Yeah, the thing that I would think about doing if I were you, this is education software, right? And it's also a multi-sided platform. I think in your day job, you're running a multi-sided platform software, correct?
Yep.
So what this is a multi-sided platform model, which basically for people who may not know what that means, is that you have different types of users and they're exchanging something that's valuable. In the case of Meetup, what they did from a revenue model standpoint was they had a revenue model. I think it was probably advertising or something lame like that. But what they moved to was a model where the people who were hosting like meetups would pay. And what that ended up doing was it ensured that whatever meetup was happening was a quality meetup because somebody was willing to pay to get the word out. And then it provided all the benefits, to the people who came. And in this case, this feels like an education platform. I could see this being used in schools, right, for lessons and things of this nature. And it'd be the type of thing where the teacher or the school is paying to use it. And maybe what you do is you give a new user, you can use this for like 10 presentations or whatever. And then after that, it's a paid platform and it's either a monthly rate or it's a per use type thing. But the other thing that I was going to say was, I think it'd be really fun to be able to, have to record the voiceover and basically be able to see like popular presentations and have those listed. Not only would that be those be interesting use cases, but because of this feature that you have of being able to take control, to be able to have like one of these presentations occurring that was recorded before and still be able to have control over the map as a user who's listening and so let's say the presenter says something interesting even though it was recorded, to then be able to zoom into Bakhmut and start looking at pictures right there in the map because you have Google Earth data. I don't know. I think you have a tremendous opportunity in the education space, and that this could remain an OSINT-focused thing, but I think that you could reach a wider audience, and it could be more of a general purpose type thing with a revenue model attached to it, and it eventually becomes enterprise software, focused on education, I think. But that's just what's coming to me as I'm just driving here in my car riffing.
Yeah, it's a good idea. I mean, we could work to record speech, and then we have like a timeline. We could build a timeline from the movements of the map that could go along with it. That is possible. Honestly, I haven't really thought about this as a revenue, in terms of how it could generate revenue, or, if it has legs in terms of, building a business around it. Because honestly, it was really just an intent to help the spaces. But, maybe in time there could be. I sort of have my hands full with completing commitments that we've made in other areas that are sort of paid work, but it's definitely something that raises the question. How are there ways to make maps a better platform for education, and having guidance in a map seems like it seems like a useful tool to me. It could also be something that is added as a feature to a larger map platform. Like I think,
Sure, of course.
it could be something.
It's a great question. Is it?
Google could add. live sharing to their maps, and then they would get all the benefits of their, platform to it. But I mean, it doesn't mean that they will anytime soon.
So
yeah, just remember that Slack started as a video game company, and the internal messaging tool, they started running out of money, and then they had this little internal messaging tool that they're using to talk with their team, and that became Slack, the fastest growing enterprise SaaS product in history. They went from 0 to like a $3 billion valuation in like 4 to 5 years, something like that. So just, you never know.
So while I appreciate the back and forth, and I understand it could be fruitful, if you guys have ideas for David, do feel free to DM him, and see he can respond as depending on the merits of the suggestion. We'll put it that way. Next time, I can call the space OSINT and software workshopping. But I really appreciate the effort that David has put in to add to the community. And I do want to run through hands, just so people can get their questions in. I'm going to go to my two co-hosts first, and then to Aaron. So Exit, why don't you go first, and then Jacoby.
Yeah. So thank you very much. Michael is going to go try and fix his mic again. And thank you to everybody who DM'd me in that short period of time to tell me that. I also had somebody who uses your app, and they said that you actually already do have layers in there. And they sent me screenshots, which was awesome. Up in the top left-hand corner, there's a button that you can click. And then if you move down to the bottom right, it actually does let you put in layers for satellite images. So you could see essentially exactly what Brad was talking about, and be able to see the Google Map kind of overlay there.
It's actually not what I was talking about. I was talking about the ability to zoom into a place and find pictures that people have posted online on a street by street, building by building basis. I'm not talking about Google Maps. I'm talking about Google Earth. So anyway, just a clarification.
Fair enough. Well, then me and the person who sent me the information misunderstood that. But either way, the idea of being able to see those layers and being able to see the topography type stuff is really interesting and really helpful when we're talking about something like Bakhmut. But I will go to Jacoby for her question.
I'm going to defer to the other hands, and then I'll come back to my question. I think it was Gurney and then Aaron, and then I'll come back to me.
Aaron might have been right in front of me.
Oh, thanks, Gurney. Go ahead, Aaron. Sorry, Aaron.
Okay. So, sorry, as the mic thing is going crazy again. David, what are you using? You're not using. What type of graphics? Yeah, it's giving me issues here. Sorry. Just I'll try to keep.
Aaron, do you want me to? I'll come back to you, and then we'll go to Gurney, and then we'll come back to you. Go ahead, Gurney.
Wait, it's working now. Okay, sorry. Have you ever thought of working using any data algorithms? Graphic, say graphics as far as a real-time editing map that can is you can you input more data in it as like a real-time 100% real-time map up to the minute, similar to what you would see, say, in the Pentagon or the White House Situation Room, stuff like that, but much more simplified. Have you thought of doing it like more automated? I know that, of course, ISW does a great job, but that's also pictures as well, and they update it as they go. But automation, I was just wondering. Thanks.
In terms of the potential development path which we have considered, the most obvious one, so currently currently what we're doing is really simplistic. when we use the native map, native SDK map view, then we're actually using like, native software to display a Google Map surface, which is the best way to do it. As it turns out, with the battle maps, like the ones that Andrew Perpetua has created, or the one that Sean Rocky created, we ran into a technical challenge that we couldn't actually. Our next level, our next hope was to put their map data onto our native map surface, but there we ran into a technical glitch that didn't allow us to do that. So, unless we rewrote the whole app, and it didn't seem worth it to do that. But that to me would have been the next phase, would be that we put map data, just the data onto a native, view that we control. As it is working currently for the battle maps that are the custom maps, they are being displayed in a web view that we are opening and refreshing as the speaker moves the map. So they don't actually give us much control over that surface. We could give the speaker a way to annotate the map as they're speaking, and then send those objects that the speaker is drawing to the audience. But what we found was that the time to author and the precision needed in many cases, especially if you're talking about an OSINT community or people who are looking at real-time maps, someone who is building these maps, like Andrew in this case, many times is putting a lot of care and research into developing those, the exact location of where the battle is happening. So it needed more time than really was suitable for a real-time experience. I mean, what you could do is build sort of like a John Madden style, like rough annotation where you're drawing on top of the map. And that was one of the things that, could be an option. But it seemed like the battle map that has been pre-prepared and researched closely was what was of more value in this sort of, in the uses that the app has been put to so far.
Thanks for answering that, David. Gurney, go ahead. You've been so patient.
Yeah, thanks, Exit. So David, just a question here, in terms of, an app for the OSINT community. So just to put it to you here, as I understand it, so there's no idea per se for this app for a revenue model, or at least not yet. But I would assume that there is nonetheless a cost or a scalable cost for the model, meaning, if it's free to users, inherent in that there's a gas fee, so to speak, right? There's a server cost. There's some sort of calculated cost in terms of what you're offering. Do I have that correct?
It's really minimal. The only thing that we have on the back end currently is the real-time data channel that is, it's like a publishing system that takes the, very, very small pieces of data and syndicates them to all the apps that are listening. Most of the work is being done on the client side in this case. We're not, we really, that's one of the nice things about the level of development that it is currently, is that it didn't actually require us to build much of a back end.
Okay, sure. I'm not too familiar with it, but I mean, it's fair to say that there are costs with it, and the people that download the app are not paying for that. Fair to say?
Well, there's the initial development cost, and there is a very, very minimal, cost for that service, which I haven't even, thought to calculate. But yeah, there is a slight cost.
Sure. And so to get to the heart, so to get to my actual question here, so regardless of thoughts for revenue or anything like that, assuming that there's a a basic cost now, and that there's some sort of scalable cost with the model. I guess my question to you is, in the OSINT community, a bit more niche, say, than somebody that is using the Google layers. Not that there's not trade-offs there, right? It's also a free product. There's also some privacy trade-offs, advertisement trade-offs there, but it's a larger user base. So I guess what I'm saying, what I'm asking you is so the product clearly seems like it has utility, as you've described it, in terms of being able to visualize exactly what's happening as the narrator's going along through the map layer. So I guess my question to you is just, in a highly specific community such as OSINT, how do you convince that community that the value add of this app is worth the potential privacy trade-offs, et cetera, to support that model, even if they're not considered now, but that there is a cost and there will be a cost, whether it scales or doesn't scale. I guess what I'm saying is to ask people to use your layer responsibly. My question to you would be, being very niche with OSINT and concerns geopolitically and different people in different regions, especially not even having ways to access the internet without circumventing their state actors. I guess I would ask you is what assurances, what guardrails have you put into your policies to think about that in advance? Even if the tool is great, how do you safeguard that traditional OSINT space or act responsibly going forward when potentially scaling it up?
Well, it's actually come up in the Iran spaces where some of the listeners to those spaces were in Iran, and there's sort of a question: should they download this app? Should they be doing this? And I wouldn't recommend people who are in a threatening zone to download an app, unnecessarily. This app is really for, and in those spaces, what we were telling people is that we know there's nothing wrong with this app, but if you don't need it, and you know Iran, and you don't need somebody to tell you where a location is on a map, or to guide you, then it's not really for you. It's really for, a Western audience that is following along, that is unfamiliar with the area, with the country that you're talking about, so that they can follow along with it. And that's, this is it's just a presentation layer for OSINT work that was already being done in Google, or a way to present it in a live format. So I'm actually not asking anyone to shift their workflow in any way. Andrew had already settled on Google Maps, so we supported that type of map. And if the interest for how to display maps had been somewhere else, then we would have displayed that. We could also display a bitmap. I'm not trying to promote this app as something that the OSINT community should adopt unless it's helpful to them in a space where they're trying to explain a battle map. But I do think there's a larger question for that, not related to this particular app, of how to communicate OSINT information and how to share it. And and I think those tools, like the example that was shown earlier about the earlier in the space tonight, where someone had developed a map to see the influences of the Iranian regime all over the world. That's very helpful, and that sort of map, I think more work like that is great. And it doesn't have to be in the context of this app necessarily. I'm not here actually to like promote or talk the OSINT community into this app, other than just there was a question of what is it. Maybe it's a useful tool for someone, maybe it's not, but it's definitely an example where we could, as volunteers, build a solution to solve a problem that was that helped to address a need in some of the spaces, as they some of the larger public spaces where you have an audience, a Western audience unfamiliar with the territory could follow along with it.
And so I appreciate that, David. We've gotten down into the weeds a little bit, but I think that some brainstorming is helpful. I also appreciate that you're doing this to help the community, and that every toolbox will have different tools, different screwdrivers and hammers for the appropriate use, and that clearly this tool has found some good use on Twitter and may continue. And your point about what's the best way to spread the message is a valid one. And so the distinction between, do we do follow along on the screen and audio via Twitter, or do we do screen sharing on Twitch, or do we do streaming to YouTube and integration of video in that format, but it's hard to see. There's no one-stop shop at the moment, but I think that there are a couple of people exploring each of the different avenues, and hopefully by coming together in forums like this one, we'll find what works for each use case, and hopefully encourage people to build the tools out, so that hopefully we get one tool that gets closer to doing it all down the road. And so just FYI, Brad, I sent you a DM. I'm hoping that we can move on in a moment. We've kept David on a little longer than I had set up for him, so I appreciate his patience. But I would encourage you to DM David if you guys have some further suggestions for him. So just before moving on, in case Jacoby has a point for David, we'll go to Jacoby.
I just had one brief question, sort of comment for you, David. As I understand it, the tools that you made use of with Language Learner and Sean Rocky, they are not currently, if I'm not mistaken, they're not currently up and being used. And what I find really interesting about what you do and your collaboration with them is to, trying different things that are useful in very, specific application. And even when they don't necessarily work long term, or they have an issue here and there, the value that you got out of that collaboration, even if it isn't operational at the moment, what how you found that process fruitful, particularly working with people who are using open source resources, and that collaboration that they engaged in with you, how you what you got out of that.
I'm not sure if you're asking what I got out of it. I think it's very satisfying to help the OSINT community, honestly. And I think all of these are very important human rights campaigns, and, campaigns for human dignity. And it seems like a very small way to make a contribution. There are people making extreme sacrifices, and we watch them every day. Their lives are being completely disrupted. And, if I see this as a very small contribution, and I'm happy to do it. And it may be just an experiment. It may just be a little bit of a donation where that is fine with me. If it helps spread the word, it helps people understand how to communicate this stuff better, that's great. And, the other thing is that if the OSINT community develops a mapping solution, I'd be happy to, some developer, any developer could probably see what we've done and copy it. And that would be fine, because, they thinking about how to present the data is good. And adding live presentation in the context of spaces, I think, has brought a lot of attention and raised the profile of OSINT tremendously. I'm a beneficiary of that. So I think as OSINT teams develop their mapping solutions, I would strongly suggest that, they can add this sort of live update layer that they can and so that they could share it with an audience the same way that we do with this map. And I'd be happy to work with them to bring the same sort of functionality to other maps if people want to.
Okay, well, David, thank you so much, both for the work you've done on that software and for coming to speak with us tonight. And who knows, maybe some collaboration will come out of the space, or you may find some more users who are keen to do their own presentations and may make use of the map. So, that's what the space is all about, is introducing people to new tools and get them thinking about how they can contribute to the community. So thank you very much, David, and hopefully we'll be in touch again.
Oh, thank you for having me, and I'm very glad to do it.
Okay, so we're going to move on, guys. We're going to run the space for about another half an hour. Because we had two great guests this evening, we may have a little bit less time for sort of open conversation. But hopefully we'll get to at least our first topic. Just before that, I do like to do an update on conversations that we've had before. So I thought I might take, 5 to 10 minutes to do kind of a blitz through recent updates on things we've talked about in the spaces in the last few weeks. And just before that, I don't want to forget that our next conversation is going to be on Sunday, the 19th at 4 p.m. We hold it a little bit earlier on Sundays so that our friends in Europe can join at a more reasonable time for them. And this week, it's going to be, I think, a very interesting conversation because we already know that we'll be discussing translation in the use of OSINT. And that Stepan S., who works with War Translated, will be coming in as our, featured guest. And we're in conversation with one or two others who are engaged. So while Stepan does manual translation, we're engaged in reaching out to one or two others who do some work with auto translation tools. And so hopefully we'll be able to present both of those sides in our conversation on Sunday. So please set your reminder and come and join us. So many of these resources are items that are going to be in the nest. So you can follow along up there. Starting with the second item, it's just a tweet that's putting forward a Wall Street Journal article from 3 days ago. We had the discussion when China proposed its peace deal, that was fairly roughly outlined, and it got at least, we'll say mixed reviews. At that time, President Zelensky had taken an open-minded approach and said that he would be willing to work with the Chinese, to build on what they had proposed. Initially, it was reported that Chinese President Xi had refused to speak with Zelensky, but this Wall Street Journal article lets us know that apparently Xi is now open to meeting with Zelensky virtually, and that he may also be meeting with Putin. And so those conversations are expected to happen next week. So we'll keep an eye on that and bring you updates, as there's news on that front. The next item in the nest, also an article from the Wall Street Journal, is the latest in their ongoing investigation into the attack on the Nord Stream pipelines. Those who have attended our spaces know that we have regularly featured the work of a few people on this, particularly the OSINT investigator, Oliver Alexander, who has been doing great work both here on Twitter and on his Substack. And right now the investigation is focused on a sailboat called the Andromeda that is being investigated whether a small team may have used that sailboat to take the equipment out necessary to attack the pipeline. We've discussed previously doubts about whether that was even feasible given the size of the boat and the amount of equipment they would need to do, deep diving over several days, moving quite a lot of equipment up and down. So don't take the Wall Street Journal article as gospel. But that is sort of the latest in the mainstream media on it. So check them out and check out the work of Oliver Alexander. The third item back, this is one that's dear to me. Those who have listened to Spaces for a long time know that, in my personal life, I've worked for many years in the finance industry, and so I tend to follow the economics associated with the war. We don't tend to talk about it here because it's not maybe as fertile ground for OSINT work, or it's, there's not as great a background in OSINT work in that area. But I did want to note that the G7 and associated countries that imposed a price cap on Russian oil, it was scheduled to be updated, I believe, every 2 months, and that date is coming up in the next few days, with the idea that the cap would be adjusted downward so that it would always be at least 5% below the market price. And the cap was set initially at $60 a barrel. Now, keep in mind that there are different types of oil, and so there are different prices depending on the grade and quality of that oil. But that in some regions, the price of oil has actually fallen below the $60 price cap, meaning that it should be adjusted downward. But the latest reports are that the majority of the G7 countries are opposed to making an adjustment at this time, which sounds inconsistent with their prior plans. And apparently some of the countries, particularly Poland and the Baltics, who take a more aggressive stance on that, are not particularly pleased, with that reported position. On my end, the last update is one by Brady Afric. It's the fifth item back in the nest. Brady does great work with various types of satellite imagery. In particular, he has been following the development of fortification or entrenchment along the front line. That's gotten to be, everybody laughed initially, at the use of, sort of undersized concrete dragon's teeth and saying, oh, it's, one trench line. But as the Russians have had several months to work at it, in many places it's now, 2 or 3 layers deep of various trench lines. And so while it still may not be, exactly formidable, it's definitely grown in scale and covers a huge range of the front. And Brady has done a great job at tracking that. This thread from 2 days ago shows the latest additions. And if you click through, he also has a tool that tracks sort of the overall picture. And his work has been covered, I believe, in the New York Times. So check that out. There were 3 other quick updates on past news, but I'm going to turn it over to Exit because these are areas that she's been paying close attention to in the last little while.
Thank you very much. So back in the nest, just behind the Brady Elfrick one, you will see the Black Sea Grain Initiative. Really quickly, Russia said they would agree to 60 days. The 3 other parties, so that's the UN, Turkey, and Ukraine, have all said, no, it's 120 days. And there hasn't been any announcements basically since then. So we're all kind of waiting to see what comes back with that. If there isn't an announcement by the end of day tomorrow, which is kind of the last work day before the actual renewal date, then I would say the confidence that they will actually have a renewal begins to drop quite significantly, or at least a renewal in time, so that no ships are kind of stuck where they are. And then back from that, you will see that the current polling for the Turkish general election shows that Erdogan is back 10 points to the opposition parties. If you talk to anybody in Turkey, they will tell you that 2 months is an exceedingly long time in that country, and basing anything on these particular polls is probably unwise, but it's certainly something to watch. And it's especially something to watch because the 60 days that Russia is suggesting for the renewal date, or for the renewal term, for the Black Sea Grain Initiative, would expire 3 days after the Turkish elections. So they could possibly have a new government. How would that change things? Would Erdogan still have the same power structure that he has now after the election? There's a whole bunch of questions there, and Turkey really is crucial to what's going on with the Black Sea Grain Initiative. And then one back from that is Erdogan met with Finland's president on Friday, or that says Friday, but they met earlier this week. And he is basically saying that Turkey is going to honor their pledge to approve NATO's or Finland's bid into NATO. But there hasn't been any updates on the other bid. And so that's just kind of something to watch as we move forward.
Thanks very much for those updates. So we only have 10 or 15 minutes left. I'm not sure how energetic the audience is feeling at this point, but I was hoping to get into a bit of a roundtable discussion about some of the developments in connection with the downing of the U.S. drone after a collision with Russian, I believe, an Su-27. And there are a couple of interesting OSINT points around that. If any of these inspire you, please do come up to either ask a question or add in a detail. We'd love to get as many people involved in the conversation as possible. And so if you follow along in the nest, okay, so sorry, just adjusting things in the nest. If you follow along in the nest, the video was released by the U.S. of the collision, and several people have noted. So a great copy of the video is up there. It's, I think, 4 back in a tweet by Mike Eckel. Several people have noted how quickly the United States moved in order to declassify this video. That took. This is the sort of thing that normally would take considerably longer. And I guess it speaks to perhaps a new attitude in U.S. intelligence of openness, whereby they think that just by being honest with the public and showing them this is what actually happened, makes it hard for Russia to spin, a counter narrative. To that end, one of the posts up there, the 3rd or 4th back, is a post by Clash Report, who just happened to get copies of the images, but it's up, from several accounts, and that actually shows the damage to the propeller itself, and that it was bent in the process of this collision. And so, the process, I guess, that occurred in terms of escalation included close passes from the Russian jets in an effort to deter the American pilots. Then they, dumped some fuel onto the drone, which of course could cause damage to its systems and may alone, have damaged its. But in this case, they then, continued the process and came with very near passes that resulted in this bent propeller that ultimately required them to put the drone down into the Black Sea. And one theory that I saw going around that I thought was interesting, it's the second item in the nest, was put up by David Helms, who's been a past guest of ours. He has done some terrific work tracking weather developments and sort of water table reservoir developments in Ukraine. So do check his account out. And he was making the point that even if there weren't direct contact, that the what is the phrase he uses? The wake turbulence coming off the wingtips of the Russian aircraft could have been enough to have seriously, shaken, caused turbulence to the drone that would result in damage. Now, I'm not enough of an expert to speak to whether wake turbulence could have resulted in a bent propeller of the type that we see in the Clash Report post. But it was at least an interesting theory. So I'd encourage you to check that thread out. And then one other point in connection with the tracking of this, and I'll have a few others I'll put up in a moment, but this last one, it's a post up there by Flight Radar, and they noted that the MQ-9, which is the type of drone that was downed in this instance, is not an RQ-4, and the reason is that apparently the RQ-4s can be regularly tracked on their flight radar service, but the MQ-9, which was downed, cannot be. And so, I've seen this a few times where when there's something that happens involving an aircraft, people will go to the flight trackers and they may not have a lot of expertise in interpreting what they see, and they see an aircraft in the region and pick a track and then say, oh, here's the track of the craft in question, and they start to build a narrative from that. And this tweet is essentially Flight Radar saying, we were not tracking the MQ-9, so if you see people saying, here's the track from Flight Radar, they're wrong. So that's worth remembering. I'll go with co-host to exit first, and then we'll go to ID10T.
So this was a question for you from somebody in the audience, but I would open it up to anybody in a speaker spot. What is your view on the downing of the drone? Do you think that the Russian maneuver was intentional to down the drone, or purely just a misjudgment and poor flying?
Well, I would welcome anybody's thoughts on that. Trained as a lawyer, there are degrees. There's, negligence, recklessness, and then sort of intention. And so I would say that it seems pretty evident that they were at least engaging in recklessness, which, is culpable enough given sort of the result. In a moment, while we work through hands, I'm going to put up a few points because I think it's important to understand sort of what the norms are, which goes to looking at how often do things like this happen. Has it been escalating recently? Is this, action at the discretion of the pilot, or does it appear to be systematic? Those are things that I would look to in evaluating, responsibility for the downing of the drone. So I'll put some of those up as we go through hands. I believe it was ID10T, I think Zodiac, and then Constantine. So go ahead, ID10T.
So Geo Confirmed just did a nice little thread on the location. They analyzed the video data from the drone itself. And to their credit, they've done quite an impressive job. But their findings are that it was outside of airspace. It was international airspace, and to that effect, international airspace is kind of the Wild West. There's international agreements, but a state-level operator like us or the Russians are under no legal obligations to have their transponder on. And the Russians have done it quite often, and we often do not have our transponders on, be it fighter aircraft, some air mobility, and smaller drones. The Global Hawk we often have on has a big wave and a hello. It is not necessary to have it on. We can turn that off anytime we want. And as far as the MQ-9 series, they do have transponders on them. We don't often use them outside of our airspace. You can find MQ-9 tracks on the history of flight radar, but in international airspace, we are under no obligations to have that on. And that Geo Confirmed is in the nest.
Great, thank you very much. Just double checking, is my audio still coming through? Okay.
It is for now.
Okay, great. This is again with live audio. Occasionally we get Twitter glitches, so I just like to double check. So anyway, thank you very much for putting the Geo Confirmed up in the nest. Zodiac, would you like to go ahead?
Thank you. Just to piggyback on that, because the ID10T brought up the same point I was going to initially bring up. With that geo-confirmed, we know now that it was well within international airspace, so that immediately kills the Russian narrative that, oh, we were just defending our territories. Yeah, well, it's international airspace and we can prove it now. So I think that's another motive behind the DoD getting this footage out as quickly as possible, because anybody that knows how to geolocate things will be able to, from the video, position it and thus prove without a doubt that this was international airspace, which then kills the Russian narrative again. But to another point you brought up, Michael, when it comes to whether this was deliberate or intentional, you got to look at the history of the Russian Air Force and their near misses over the past few years with NATO and other aircraft as they try to spook people and constantly getting called out and condemned for, potentially causing an accident. And well, this time they did. And I think part of that is that a lot of these pilots are also pilots that have been flying a lot of sorties into Ukraine that they potentially aren't getting a lot of rest. So, you're getting tired, beleaguered pilots, potentially now inexperienced pilots, and they try to pull off a very risky maneuver to try and near miss an aircraft, and they ended up hitting, which could have very easily have cost this SU, what was it, 34 or 37, whatever, could have cost that pilot his life just by trying to buzz this little drone.
Yeah, it strikes me as being incredibly risky. And you partly wonder why that is. And that goes to understanding whether this is likely to have been at pilot discretion or whether it's more systematic. And so I've put up a few items in the nest that speak to that. So starting with the second item back, it's helpful to understand what the baseline is. And so Rob Lee, who has been doing great work in Ukraine, unsurprisingly has been doing great work for a long time. And he actually has a thread that goes back almost 3 years, trying to document every single close aerial intercept between NATO and Russian aircraft, which is a great resource. So the link to the thread is there. And that just, goes to show you sort of that there have been many of these types of encounters, even in the last few years. Likewise, Dara Massicott has worked with RAND on a publication, and she refers to them as, what does she call them? Coercive signaling is the term that they use in that report. So that can also give you an idea of what the baseline on this behavior is. And then finally, there's a Reuters report. It's the tweet in the nest put up by Apex. But it's a Reuters story noting that the U.S. has reported seeing a spike in unprofessional Air Force behavior over Syria. And so it seems like it's Russian aggression in several regions and not just limited to what's happening in Ukraine. I thought did somebody have a hand up? They put them down. Okay, I had one more round of links in connection with this that I think are interesting. I will put them up quickly, and just to round the space out. Some of these relate to good accounts I'd encourage you to follow for OSINT purposes more generally. And so that's 2. And one more. Right. Okay. So they should be populating the nest shortly. The first that will pop up in a moment is a tweet by JD Work, He's involved in cyber warfare matters, but he tracks sort of strategy generally, and he makes the note that connected with ID10T's point or Zodiac's point is that to the extent that this happened in international airspace, the Chinese will be watching the U.S. reaction to this closely, because China asserts control over a broad swath of the South China Sea that the rest of the world regards as international airspace. And so if Russia starts to press its presence, beyond its recognized borders, China may take that as precedent or look at the U.S. reaction and say, oh, well, the U.S. has failed to react in this case. And, that may govern their future behavior. Related to this, the downing of the drone, I just wanted to cover sourcing reports. So there's a tweet in the nest from me, and it says, here's the video of the interview with the Turkish Minister of National Defense, in which he does not actually confirm that they will allow U.S. warships through the straits. But what he says is that they're in discussions with the United States, and we'll see. And the reason this is a cautionary example is because if you click through to that tweet, I have quote tweeted another account that regularly posts breaking news. And what the statement they had made is that Turkey is ready to let U.S. warships pass through. And that framing, number one, it's not true. They didn't say we will. They said we're thinking about it. And number two, by saying U.S. warships through, gives the impression that it may be an escalation in response to the downing of the drone, as opposed to it had sounded like Turkey was only considering it for recovery purposes explicitly. So that's just one of my regular cautions on breaking news accounts. It's always helpful if you can go to the source. Just an FYI, we're bringing Constantine up. Okay, it looks like he's joined us. Constantine, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry, I wanted to talk to say an opinion about this drone, and I got disconnected 2 times. I just wanted to say, as someone who is a bit familiar with Russian mentality and their military, I would say that this is definitely a deliberate shutdown. It's done in this manner to slap United States on the face, and it's an attempt to to show strength at the same time without trying to provoke it as a military action, like, for example, shooting it down. That would be a clear act of aggression against United States property. Doing it like this, it would, knowing the how some officials in the West behave, it would just does not trigger a proper reaction, and this would essentially lead to further escalating. So if United States doesn't do anything, they're gonna keep doing it. Like you said, China will start looking at it. There are a lot of United States assets flying in the South China Sea as well, and this sets up a precedent. And it's a large, I would not say escalation, but it's a large step towards an escalation, and this is what they wanted to do. I don't believe it's been done just accidentally. Things like this don't happen accidentally, trust me. And when people say that Russian pilots are so stupid, so bad, it's not true as well. They have really good pilots. They have problems with large-scale operation, but it does not really reflect individual pilot skills. And Russian pilots are actually pretty good and trained pretty well. So I would really, try to avoid being. There are some people that are, laughing at it and just saying that Russians are idiots. It's not true. It's what happened here is a major planned operation.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate your opinion, and I think you're probably right. OPSEC, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, so I guess I would definitely agree that this was planned in terms of the harassment. As for actually taking down the U.S. asset, I'm not in the camp that was intentional. And I think if you look at the video, I think they were just being reckless and got too close. And you can also see they were still dumping fuel. So I think it was supposed to be just another close pass. And if they were trying to take it down, they wouldn't try and clip the drone. There are other ways that they could have done that. So I'm not in the camp that this was an intentional downing.
So OPSEC, any opinion on, did the Su-27 have to make contact with the propeller, or is there any possibility that it was like turbulence or jet wash that could have caused the damage?
Yeah, so we were talking about this actually. I think the day it happened, where that 100% could have been responsible for taking down the Reaper. But at the same time, if you look at the video, like I was saying, you can see it's still, the Su-27 is dumping fuel, and that's why I think that this was supposed to be another close pass. And if you look at the trajectory of the plane, it's really hard to believe that it didn't make contact in that final pass. So, yeah, I think the way the footage is clipped, it's hard to tell when the propeller was bent. My belief would be that that's not indication of contact, because there's no way a jet like the Su-27 would be able to just clip the propeller. So look at the airframe itself and decide whether or not you could tap the propeller without hitting one of the tail fins. It's not possible.
Yeah, and one of the reports was that the jet then subsequently landed at a Crimean airbase with, notable damage, was the one I had heard on it. But of course, that's a report, and there was no substantiating evidence. But it sounds like it did take some damage.
So we reported from multiple sources, and I don't think they're all derivative of the first source to indicate that. So I would believe that makes sense. And again, I don't think the intention was to take it down by impacting it. I don't think that's what they were going for.
Yeah, in terms of culpability, I would say that recklessness is just as bad, and it does seem like a pattern of behavior. Given the baseline studies of Dara and Rob Lee, and U.S. reports of escalation recently as well. So maybe for our last comment from the audience, or second last comment from the audience, we'll go to ID10T and then back to OPSEC.
Yeah, just to support OPSEC in his statements, to give a little flight dynamics, the operation window where the Reaper can safely maintain itself in the air is much, much slower than an Su-27 or any other fighter aircraft. Their stability comes from speed. And for that Su-27 to come in and be close enough to dump fuel on it, it's already very close to its stall speed. Stall speed is the speed at which an aircraft tends to fall out of the sky. So you must maintain that speed or higher. So it's already in a nose-up position. The controls are not going to function properly, going to have limited mobility. So then it's dumping fuel, just as OPSEC said, it's dumping fuel during the interaction, that the contact was not intentional. Now, malicious intent, I don't think that's in question. That's obvious. But the contact, I don't think was intentional at all, and it was a matter of pilot getting too close, too slow speed, not having the control, made contact inadvertently.
Okay. OPSEC, would you like to come back in?
Yeah, so I was actually going to bring up stall speed, and I think it was ID10T was talking about this in that same conversation that I was referencing before, and he kind of sent me down this whole rabbit hole, and that's part of where my opinion's coming from at this point. I think the context of how close it was to Crimea is important. It makes sense that they were being aggressive. It almost makes sense that they were being reckless. I think if you viewed this through the lens of the United States and how we would react in a similar situation, I don't think we'd be dumping fuel on it. But there's no doubt in my mind that there would be some sort of escort out of that close proximity to airspace. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, what it comes down to is Russia is obviously trying to defend that zone. They are making up, these special air regimes that, there's not a whole lot of international legal basis for those, but I can understand why they would be acting a bit more aggressively, but I don't think the downing of this drone, especially if it was through contact, is a good look for Russia or for the Russian pilots. So at the end of the day, it doesn't change too much, and I would hope that the United States would continue all of these operations. Yeah, so I don't think it would be wise for them to change any of the actions that they're currently taking. I think the shade that they threw about the pilots being, inexperienced is appropriate. And then I would also say that when it comes to U.S. intel in Ukraine, I think we have this rare glimpse into sort of the analysis that they can provide. And they have been very straightforward and honest about their assessments. So if they're saying that, this was direct contact, I have no reason not to believe them. And I think this is pretty refreshing, honestly, from U.S. intelligence, because a lot of the times that we've seen them make reports in the past, they've tried to sort of obfuscate the truth. And I think in this case, and with almost everything we've seen in Ukraine, they've been pretty straightforward.
Well, thank you very much. So late breaking, we're joined by one more speaker. I'm told that Truth Seeker may have some perspective as a pilot. So Truth Seeker, did you want to go ahead?
Sure. I actually have worked with the U.S. Air Force. I was actually trained by the 72nd and the 45th out of actually Vance Air Force Base with the F-5 or AKA T-38 Talon, which was made by Northrop Grumman. People do not actually understand your SU airplane was not dumping fuel. That is a misconception 100%. That is what we call an afterburn. That is part of the engine of the jet fuel while we were actually piloting the plane. He did come close enough videos that we have actually been shown that the public has seen, but also military has actually seen the damages of what had actually happened to the Russian aircraft. Russia, no one doubt, it was not a pilot error. It was a close-up of trying to take down the drone. They did not want to do it the other perspective way to shoot it down. They've actually said this over time and time again, the last 2.5 to 3 years. Also, while we've been over in Syria, if you do not know this, while they actually tried to take out another drone in Syria, the Russian government and us had come within like 3 feet of one another over the last 2.5 years, like about 117 times. What you guys do not actually understand, if you get out on a boat right now, okay, I will tell you, I just got back from the Gulf of Mexico, international waters. We have 27 Russian naval ships sitting in international waters. We have 5 U.S. naval ships, 2 U.S. submarines in that area. We also have 3 Coast Guard in that area. Same thing with the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans as
So
well, if you do not know
when you
this.
say that area, do you mean because
Right
my
off of
understanding is
Corpus Christi.
Oh, I see, in the Gulf. I understand. Yes. Okay.
Yes, in the Gulf of Mexico. So they do actually have us sitting there. If people do not realize, since we've been going back to the Korean War with Russia, because us as Americans, we had our Civil War, the North and the South, right? We did not believe, and we went against tyranny and oppression and everything else. Some people talk about, oh, it's slavery, everything else. But let me tell you what, when we did Korea, Korea was Korea. The people of the South were not just South. They were from the whole entire island. We promised them we would help them because they didn't like how they were running their government.
So
North Korea.
I'm just debating what to do. Truth Seeker, I'm going to unmute. You were losing me. Can you explain quickly? So, I mean, your point about Afterburner, I hear that, how that's related. Can you quickly explain how the Russian naval presence is related to the Black Sea matter? Go ahead.
Correct, because this has all been a proxy war since Korea. If you've actually done your history, you've done your research, this afterburn effect that actually did come into effect, it is not jet fuel being tossed out. You can actually, if you become a pilot, talk to military pilots, you examine. If you go to the FAA, you take different tests. I'm actually a lieutenant colonel. I can show you my DOD, I can show you my CAT card, I can show you my 214, I can show you everything else as well. So I'm saying this has all been a proxy war between us and Russia, so it's only going to get worse. It's going to get worse, and nobody knows what's going to happen.
Okay, so I hear you on your opinion. As regards the matter of whether it's afterburn or fuel dumping, it's worth looking into. I haven't heard that proposed before. I suspect that maybe OPSEC, who is waving, will comment on that. I do know that the U.S. had said that they engaged in something like 5 different fuel dump passes, which seems like an awful lot. I don't know if that would be, in your opinion, 5 afterburn runs, but in any event, we're going to go to OPSEC and then we're going to wrap. Okay, go ahead, OPSEC. I'll unmute.
Yeah, I mean, the DoD released the video, so I don't know if you've seen that. It's pretty clearly fuel that they are dumping. Anyone who has studied the matter, and I understand that you are a pilot. I also know pilots in the Air Force. That is not by itself just afterburn. That's just not the case. And if you're a lieutenant colonel, congrats. I wouldn't share your CAT card or any other information because when it comes to PERSEC, that's probably not a great idea. And I'm sure you've done annual training on that. But if you're saying, because of your credentials that you can say this is a proxy war and that the United States is just making the shit up, and because you are a LT colonel, you have this experience, which I appreciate, great, but you're also undermining and directly contradicting what was said by the DoD as well as Lloyd Austin. So
they can prove 3 dumps. Yes, I agree with you.
Okay, so that's the whole point here.
Right, but an afterburn, if you go to an
So I'm not too worried about debating, given that there's, a video. I appreciate your input, Truth Seeker, but I think people can go and make their own minds up. You've made your point about what it could be, and people can go and investigate as they please. With regard to proxy war, the space isn't really intended to be a political space. Most of us here have been discussing Ukraine for a long time and don't feel that way, certainly. But I will unmute. I'm going to let OPSEC say one more thing, and then I'm going to wrap up because we're like 20 minutes past time. Go ahead, OPSEC.
I'll be real quick. So this is a open source space. We can see the plane dumping fuel, and so you can stand on that as a fact. It was released by the DoD, so I think we need to at least acknowledge that that did happen, and that was part of this incident. And it wasn't just the use of afterburners. So I think, just to put a pin in it, that might be how they damaged the drone itself, but we can all acknowledge that there were fuel dumps. And so let's not backtrack and say that that didn't happen, only to say, okay, yeah, it happened on a few passes. We have the video. So I guess with that, I'll just kind of wrap it up.
Okay. Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate the input. We just focus to keep it on track. Last 2 points, I'm just going to put them in the nest as resources that people can look at. It's the second and third items back. Following the downing of the drone, there was a great account. So the post is by D. Mojavenis, but he is quote tweeting Olga Honcharenko. So if you click through, and Olga is one of those accounts that tracks Russian radio comm systems. And so she was tracking the Russian communications in efforts to recover debris. And I'm only highlighting that to say Olga is a great account to follow, as is D. Mojavensis, as regularly posting good OSINT work. So check them out. And then finally, really just as color background, the third item in the nest is up by H.I. Sutton. It's a cutaway of the extremely old recovery ship, which is called the Comuna. So it's kind of an interesting graphic. And this ship was built in 1912. So there's your little trivia point. So reminder that we will have a space on Sunday at 4:00 on translation. Please do set a reminder to show up. As a last point, we had been talking about geolocation. I'm not sure if Exit, did you want to mention a puzzle?
I sure do. Could you stall for 2 minutes while I find it? 1 sec.
Sure. I will stall by saying to the audience once again, thank you very much for bearing with us despite our technical difficulties earlier on. I think we had a great conversation both with Nalcio on his losses tracking with the Oryx team and also with the other data teams that he's working with. And reminder that you can help him if you'd like by looking on TikTok and Facebook. In particular, if you follow his account on TikTok, which goes by the same handle as here on Twitter, Nalcio26, you can see the accounts that he follows and sort of train your algorithm. If you find footage via TikTok or Facebook, or I think he also highlighted if anybody has access to vContact, which is a little harder to search within, but some people listening may have some good sources. You can send that material to him, including via Twitter DM. And if you do, please include any links to the original source, because that will help them fill out their catalog of losses. And then we spoke with David Rosnow, who is a developer who's developed the Live Map app. It's been used by several OSINT groups, both for Ukrainian presentations. Andrew Perpetua and one other gentleman had used it for Ukraine, and then some of the Iran groups were using it as well. And that's the sort of thing where if you develop your own map of events on the ground using Google Maps, you could then contact David and ask him to make your maps available for presentations here on Twitter so that everybody can follow along at the same time. I think that was enough coverage for Exit. Exit, go ahead with our last challenge.
My apologies, everybody. It's been a real heck of a space. I am just putting up in the nest. If you've been around for a while, you may have come to some of the geolocation spaces that we used to run. And they were a ton of fun. And one of the things that we used to do at them is that we would bring different pieces for people to geolocate. We did riddles, we did pictures, we did ships, all sorts of things. And today we're gonna roll back and do a postcard. So in the nest, in just a second here, and I will drop it in the comments, it should be in the nest for you now, you will see a tweet and it has a postcard there. And so you will note that there's 4 different pictures in there. And the idea is that you're supposed to locate the country for each of those pictures. And in a couple days, so maybe on Sunday, right before Mr. Bond's next space, we will post the answers to that, and you'll be able to decide whether or not you figured it out or you still have some extra learning to do on that particular thing. It's something that we all enjoyed doing in the past, and hopefully you can take it away and learn a new skill when you do it at home.
If you need to learn some of the techniques necessary to locate those, because in some cases you can't just rely on writing or recognition of immediately obvious things. You may need to do things like reverse image searching. Please do feel free to use the replies in response to this space to sort of discuss techniques if you're interested. Jacoby, did you want to chime in?
I just had a quick question for Exit about those past spaces. Are the recordings of those spaces still up, or are they long past their time? I was just curious, because if so, it would be, something that people could go look forward to.
Yeah, I did not save them at the time. So no, they do not exist, unfortunately, anymore. But there's lots of people in these spaces who used to be there. And if you have questions, by all means, put them in the comments. I'm sure that someone will help you with those questions. These particular postcards are a really great first step to learn on. They tend to be a little bit more accessible for certain, like for a lot of us, me included. And so there's lots of signs in them, things like that, that can really help you narrow down what you're looking for.
Okay, well, guys, enjoy that as a puzzle. And I think the idea is we'll try to include one of those in each space going forward. So maybe it will be your reward for sticking around until the end. On that note, thank you very much for joining us and for your patience as we work through some of the Twitter issues. Thanks to everybody who spoke, particularly our guests today, David and Nalcio. You guys were terrific. And thank you to my co-hosts, including Exit, Jacoby, and Zodiac, without whom it would be very difficult for me to put all this together. I look forward to chatting with you guys on Sunday. Please join us then. Good night.